The night Cade Mercer rode into Harlan's Creek, three people were already planning to destroy Maris Rowan's life, and none of them lost a minute of sleep over it. She didn't know that yet. She was still refilling coffee cups nobody wanted, still wearing a smile nobody noticed, still breathing in the particular smell of a diner past midnight, burnt grease, old wood, the ghost of her mother's perfume underneath all of it. The neon sign outside buzzed like something dying. The storm outside pressed against the glass like it wanted in. And somewhere on a rain-black highway, a single headlight cut through the dark. It was already too late to stop what was coming. If this story already has its hooks in you, hit subscribe and stay close. Drop your city and country in the comments so I can see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go. The diner had no business still being open. That was the honest truth Maris Rowan carried every single night she unlocked the front door of Clyde's Route 9 diner. A building that smelled like 1987 and refused to die, perched on the edge of Harlan's Creek, Tennessee, where the highway bent hard left, and most people forgot to look right. The parking lot was cracked asphalt and old cigarette butts. The booths were vinyl patched with electrical tape. The neon sign above the door, Clyde's, red letters, the apostrophe long burned out, buzzed with the particular frequency of something in its final days. But the diner was still open, and Maris was still there, 5'1" in her work shoes, 29 years old and already carrying the posture of someone 20 years older. She had her mother's hands, small, efficient, always moving, and her father's silence, which is to say she'd inherited the particular talent for absorbing damage without making a sound. Tonight she moved between tables with the muscle memory of someone who'd stopped counting the years. Table 4 needed ketchup. The coffee at the counter was burning low. Old Ray Desmond had been sitting in the corner booth for 3 hours, nursing a single cup of decaf and watching the Weather Channel on the mounted TV above the register, which was showing the same storm system it had been showing since 7 o'clock. The kind of storm that built slowly, moved slow, and then hit you all at once. She refilled Ray's cup without being asked. He didn't look up. "Bad one coming," he said. "They're all bad," Maris said. She moved on. The lunch crowd, if you could call it that, had cleared out by 2 in the afternoon. The dinner rush was 3 truckers and a family from out of state who'd gotten turned around on the interstate. By 9 o'clock it was just Ray, a pair of teenagers sharing a basket of fries they couldn't really afford, and the particular silence of a town that had quietly decided Maris Rowan's problems were not its problems. She knew that silence well. She'd been living inside it for 14 months. That was how long it had been since her mother died. Carol Rowan, 54 years old, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to burial. The kind of medical event that doesn't just take a person, it takes everything around them too, methodically. The way a fire doesn't just burn the house down, but salts the ground underneath. The hospital bills had arrived before the funeral flowers finished dying. The collection notices started the month after. And the debt, layered and compounding, a number that didn't feel real because no real number should be able to grow that fast, had become the third presence in Maris's life, following her from the diner to her car to the house she'd grown up in, the house she was fighting to keep. She had 1 month left. Maybe less, depending on which letter she opened next. She hadn't opened the last 3. The teenagers left at 9:15, leaving behind a tip that was mostly change and a ketchup packet they'd squeezed onto the table for no reason she could identify. She cleaned it up without expression. Ray Desmond finally stood, shrugged on his coat, dropped a 5 on the counter, even though his coffee had cost $2.50, and nodded at her on his way out in the way men of his generation nodded. Not unkind, but not helpful either. Acknowledgement without action, the town's specialty. The door swung shut. The buzzing neon filled the quiet. Maris stood behind the counter and looked at the $5 bill for a moment. Then she picked it up, put it in her apron, and started wiping down the countertop. Outside, the temperature had dropped another 4 degrees since sundown. She knew because the draft under the front door had gotten colder and more insistent, and because her left knee, the one she'd hurt 2 winters ago slipping on ice in the parking lot, the injury she couldn't afford to have looked at, had started sending its particular signal of dull, grinding complaint. The storm Ray had been watching was not theoretical anymore. She could hear it pressing against the roof, testing the seams of a building that had already given up on being structurally sound and was now operating purely on stubbornness. She was thinking about the water stain on the ceiling above booth 3. She was thinking about whether she could work a double on Saturday. She was thinking about the number on the last letter she hadn't opened, the one she'd memorized through the envelope without meaning to. She was not thinking about the sound of an engine. Not at first. It came from far off. A low, rolling growl that didn't belong to any of the trucks that usually used Route 9 at this hour. Something heavier. Something that idled differently, that had a particular voice. It got louder, then the headlights swept across the rain-wet windows, and Maris glanced up from the counter just as the Harley came to a stop in the parking lot. She watched through the glass. The rider didn't move right away. He sat there in the rain for a moment, engine ticking down, water running off the shoulders of a leather jacket that looked like it had been through every kind of weather and remembered all of them. The jacket had a patch on the back. She couldn't read it from this distance. Then he put the kickstand down, pulled off his helmet, and just sat there for a moment longer with rain hitting his face. And something about that, the stillness of it, the way he didn't rush, made Maris stay very still herself. He was big. Not in the way that draws attention at a bar, but in the way that changes the geometry of a room before he's even entered it. Wide across the shoulders, moving like someone who'd learned to carry weight a long time ago and had stopped thinking about it. A face that had been rearranged once or twice, a scar along the jaw, another that pulled at the corner of his right eye, giving him a permanent expression that was somewhere between exhaustion and warning. He came through the door. The bell above it chimed. The cold air came in with him, immediate, sharp, smelling of wet asphalt and engine oil, and the particular outside smell of a storm that was now genuinely here. Every instinct Maris had was calibrated by years of late-night diner work. She could read a room, read a customer, read the specific kind of danger that walked in after midnight. She did the math fast, the way she always did. Big man, road-worn, wearing a patch she still couldn't fully read from here. Some kind of club insignia. A skull worked into it, lettering curved above and below, scar on his jaw, hands that had done physical work. Moving through the diner with the careful, deliberate motion of someone who never forgot that he took up space, who'd learned long ago that his presence registered before he said a word. She put a mug on the counter. "Coffee?" she said. He stopped at the counter and looked at her. His eyes were gray-brown, tired in a specific way she recognized. Not sleepy tired, but the tiredness that comes from carrying something invisible for too long. "Yeah," he said, single syllable. Not rude, just economical. She poured. He wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't drink right away, just let the warmth work into his palms, and Maris noticed the knuckles. Scarred. Old, she thought. Not recent. She went back to wiping down the counter. For a while, neither of them spoke, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had both, in their own ways, been through enough that they didn't need to fill quiet with noise. "Storm's bad," she said eventually. "I've ridden through worse." She believed him. "You passing through?" He looked at her again. "Something like that." The patch on the back of his jacket read Iron Veil MC in an arc above the skull. She could see it now that he'd set his helmet on the stool beside him. Below the skull, curved in the same worn lettering, "Bound by Blood." It was old stitching, the kind of patch that had been through weather and time and hadn't been replaced because replacement wasn't the point. She didn't ask about it. That was the thing about working late nights in a place like this. You learned the difference between questions that were welcome and questions that weren't. He finished the first cup. She refilled it without being asked. He glanced at her, and there might have been the edge of something there, not quite gratitude, but the acknowledgement of being seen. By 10:30, he'd had 3 cups of coffee and eaten a piece of pie she'd almost apologized for. The last of the day, the crust slightly overdone. And he'd eaten it without complaint, eating the way men eat when they've forgotten that food is supposed to be enjoyed. Functional. Steady. She was doing this cash drawer when the bell above the door went again. 2 men. Both young, mid-20s, wearing the loose, easy confidence of people who'd never had a reason to question whether they were welcome anywhere. She recognized one of them, Derek Calloway, whose older brother had gone to school with Maris, whose family owned the auto parts supply on 3rd Street. The other one she didn't know. Both of them had that look people got when they came into the diner after 10. Looking for something to do, which often meant looking for someone to make uncomfortable. They sat at the counter, 2 stools down from the biker. Derek looked at the man, made no effort to be subtle about it. Then he looked at Maris with that particular expression, half smirk, half eyebrow, that said, "Are you seeing this?" Maris kept her face even. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee," Derek said. Then, louder than he needed to, "You guys open late these days? I figured you would have shut this place down by now. Thought Clyde's was on its last legs." "We close at 11. "Right." He looked at the biker again. "Busy night?" The man with the iron veil patch didn't look up from his coffee. "Not really," Maris said. Derek's friend laughed, a little too easily, testing something. "Where you from?" Derek asked. This time he was talking to the biker. Cade, she didn't know his name yet, would learn it later, set down his mug. He turned his head and looked at Derek Calloway with those gray-brown eyes, and the quality of the room changed. Not dramatically. There was no threat made, no voice raised. It was more like a shift in air pressure, like something very large becoming very still. Derek's smirk thinned. "Just passing through," Cade said. Same answer he'd given her, same weight to it. A long pause. "Right," Derek said. He turned back to his coffee. His friend had stopped laughing. Maris topped off Derek's cup and moved down the counter. She could feel the tension settling, redistributing. She'd seen men try to pick at something and then decide against it. Usually because of calculation. This guy was bigger, or this wasn't worth the trouble, or some instinct of self-preservation kicked in just in time. But this one, the way Derek had backed down, it hadn't been about size or math. It had been something in Cade's eyes, like looking through a window into a room where something very serious had happened once, and the furniture had never quite been put back right. At 11 o'clock, she flipped the sign to closed. Derek and his friend left without incident. The parking lot outside was empty now, except for her 15-year-old Civic and Cade's Harley, both of them being battered by the same rain. He was pulling on his jacket. "You sure about heading out in this?" she said. He looked at the window. The rain was serious now. "It'll pass," he said. "It's moving slow." He picked up his helmet. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a business card. Plain white, a phone number, the iron veil skull in one corner, no name on it, and set it on the counter without explanation. She looked at it. "In case the storm gets worse," he said, which she was almost certain wasn't what he meant. He put money on the counter, too much, she saw when she counted it later, more than the coffee and pie had cost by a significant margin, and he moved toward the door. "Hey," Maris said. He stopped. She was behind the counter, hand resting on the laminate surface, the buzzing neon throwing its tired red light over everything. She thought about saying something practical, something polite, something that would cost her nothing and mean nothing. Instead, she said, "You deserve better than the way they stare." He stood with his hand on the door for a moment. He didn't turn around, but something shifted in the set of his shoulders. Barely there, the kind of thing you only caught if you'd spent years reading rooms. Like a man who'd been braced for something a long time, and for 1 second forgot to brace. Then he pushed through the door, and the cold air rushed back in, and the bell chimed, and he was gone. She listened to the Harley fire up in the parking lot, listened to it pull out onto Route 9, the engine note dissolving into the storm, getting quieter and quieter, until it was just the rain and the wind and the buzzing neon sign, and Maris Rowan alone in the diner with a business card on the counter, and the particular quiet of a night that felt like it had shifted something without her permission. She picked up the card. She told herself she wasn't going to keep it. She put it in her apron pocket. She drove home through the storm to the house her mother had left her. A 2-bedroom bungalow on Crestline Street with new water damage in the kitchen ceiling and a porch step that had been rotting since September. And she did not open the mail on the kitchen table. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat at the table and looked at the business card she'd taken out of her apron and set in front of her. She didn't know the man's name. She put the card in the junk drawer next to dead batteries and takeout menus and a pen that had stopped working 2 years ago. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. 7 days later, Preston Hale walked into the diner at 2:17 in the afternoon wearing a suit that cost more than Maris made in a month, and everything she'd been managing to hold together began to come apart in front of a half-full lunch crowd that watched it happen the way people watch a car accident, with attention but without any intention of helping. Preston Hale was not physically imposing. He was medium height, soft around the middle, with the kind of smile that existed entirely on the surface of the face and had no warmth anywhere beneath it. He carried a leather portfolio. His shoes were polished. He moved through Clyde's diner like a man who had never once doubted his right to be in any room. He sat at the counter and asked for water. She brought it. Then he opened the portfolio and set the papers on the counter between them, and he said, without lowering his voice, in a diner with 7 occupied tables and Ray Desmond in the corner and Derek Calloway's aunt at table 4, "Ms. Rowan, I represent Meridian Credit Services. You're now 90 days delinquent on the Consolidated Medical Debt account number." "I know what account number it is," she said. "Then you're aware we've reached the enforcement threshold." He turned a page. "The lien on this property. This is my place of work." "I understand that." He said it pleasantly. "I'm simply ensuring you're informed. You have 30 days to bring the account current or produce a repayment agreement. Failing that, we'll proceed with the lien enforcement on the Route 9 property, which includes the diner." He turned another page. "And the Crestline Street property. Your residence." The diner had gone quiet. Maris was aware of every pair of eyes on her. She kept her own eyes on Preston Hale's portfolio. "I've contacted your office 3 times about a payment plan," she said. "Unfortunately, those requests were submitted after the initial deadline, because I was dealing with my mother's estate." "I understand." Same pleasantness, same nothing behind it. "However, the account terms, get out." He looked up at her. "We're not finished," he said. "Yes," she said. "We are." A beat. He gathered his papers with the unhurried ease of a man who knows he's already won the important argument, the one that happens in the courtroom months later. He put the portfolio under his arm. He left a business card on the counter, heavy stock, embossed, and walked out. The bell above the door chimed. The diner stayed quiet for 3 more seconds. Then conversation resumed, slowly, the way water finds its level. Ray Desmond looked back at the television. Derek Calloway's aunt went back to her soup. Table 4, Table 6, Table 2. All of them settling back into their own business, their own afternoons, their own problems. Not a single person looked at Maris. Not one. She picked up Preston Hale's business card. She looked at it. Heavy stock, yes. Meridian Credit Services. A downtown Nashville address. A direct line. She put it in her apron. She picked up the coffee pot. She went back to work. But her hands, she noticed distantly, were shaking. She got through the rest of the lunch service on autopilot, refilling cups, running plates, making change, answering questions about the soup special with words. Her mouth was producing independent of any active thought. She cleaned table 4 after Calloway's aunt left. She restocked the sugar caddies. She did everything she always did, in the order she always did it, and if her eyes were slightly too bright and her jaw slightly too tight, nobody who remained bothered to look closely enough to notice. At 3 o'clock, she locked herself in the single-stall bathroom for 4 minutes. She sat on the edge of the sink and breathed. 30 days. Not the diner. The diner had been Clyde's. Old Clyde Paris had left it to her mother in a will that had surprised everyone, including Carol Rowan, and it had passed to Maris when her mother died. One more thing she hadn't asked for and couldn't afford to lose. And not just the diner. The house. The house where she had grown up, where her mother had grown up, where the kitchen still smelled faintly of her mother's cooking on certain mornings, and the bedroom closet still held 3 of her mother's dresses that Maris had not been able to move. 30 days. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. She did not cry. She hadn't cried since the funeral, and she didn't entirely understand why, only that grief, for her, had taken the form of forward motion. Keep working, keep paying, keep the doors open, keep the lights on. And stopping long enough to cry felt like a luxury she couldn't figure out how to schedule. She splashed water on her face. She went back out. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with all the unopened letters finally open around her, the specific, exhausting courage it had taken to open them all at once, all the numbers laid out, the total assembling itself in her head like something she could not look away from. She opened the junk drawer. Dead batteries, takeout menus, the useless pen, the white business card with the iron veil skull. She picked it up. She told herself she was going to put it back. She turned it over. A single phone number, no name. She thought about a man sitting very still in the rain before he came through a door. She thought about knuckles, about eyes the color of exhausted weather, about the way he'd stopped when she called after him, and the way his shoulders had shifted at those words. and how she hadn't been able to stop thinking about that shift for 7 days. Not because it meant anything she could name, but because it was the first time in 14 months she'd said something true to another person and felt it land. Her hands had stopped shaking, which was something. She picked up her phone. She dialed. It rang 4 times and she almost hung up, would have hung up, except that on the 5th ring something connected and there was road noise in the background, and then a voice she recognized, sparse, low, carrying the weight of distance, said, "Yeah, this is—" She stopped. "This is Maris, from the diner in Harlan's Creek. You came in last week during the storm. I'm sorry to call. You left a card and I probably shouldn't have— I know who you are," he said. Silence. Road noise, wind at his end. "I'm in trouble," she said. "Not performance. Just the flat truth, the way you say something when you've run out of energy to frame it." "I don't know why I'm calling you. I don't know what I think you can— I don't even know your name." "Cade," he said. She waited. He said, "Tell me what kind of trouble." And so she told him. All of it. The debt, the letters, the 30 days, the lien, the diner, the house on Crestline Street. She told it the way she'd been unable to tell it to anyone else in this town. Without apology. Without managing his reaction. Without the specific performance of acceptable female distress that she'd been unconsciously deploying for 14 months. She just told him. He did not interrupt. When she finished, there was a long pause. Just road noise and the sound of rain at her end, light this time, not the storm of last week, but something residual. Then he said, very quiet, "Stay where you are." What does that mean? But the line was already doing something different, not dead, just held, like he'd moved the phone away from his face. And then, distantly, through the phone, she heard something that made the fine hairs on her arms stand straight. An engine, starting up. Then another. Then, further out, another. She sat at her kitchen table with Preston Hale's opened letters spread around her, and she held the phone, and she listened to engines starting in the distance, and she did not understand what was happening. Could not have understood, had no framework for it yet, except that something about the sound of it, the accumulation of it, made something in her chest do a thing she wasn't ready for. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. "Cade," she said. The road noise returned. He'd come back. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be different." The call ended. Maris sat there in the kitchen for a long time. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street was quiet. Harlan's Creek was asleep, the way it was always asleep, heavy, undisturbed, completely unaware that something was already in motion on the highways surrounding it, something with engines and leather and the particular uncompromising logic of men who had decided, without announcement, without ceremony, that one frightened woman in a diner with buzzing neon and a mother's memory in the walls of a house she was about to lose was worth showing up for. She didn't sleep. By 4 a.m. she was standing at her front window. The street was still empty. But somewhere out past the town limits, on the highways she couldn't see from here, the thunder was not thunder, and it was getting closer. She counted engines the way some people count breaths, unconsciously, compulsively, needing the number to make sense of something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. By 4:17 a.m., there were 7 distinct sounds out past the tree line. By 4:40, there were more than she could separate. The highway that ran parallel to Crestline Street carried sound strangely in cold weather, compressed it, delivered it cleaner than the distance should have allowed. And what she heard through her kitchen window was not traffic. Traffic had rhythm, variation, the random arrival of individual vehicles with individual purposes. What she was hearing had a different quality, a coherence, like something being organized. She made coffee she didn't need. She stood at the window with both hands around the mug and watched the empty street and told herself that whatever she'd started by making that phone call could still be stopped. She could call back, say she'd overreacted, say she had it handled. She didn't call back. At 5:53 a.m., the first pair of headlights came down Crestline Street. 2 motorcycles riding side by side, moving slow. They didn't stop. Just past the house, taking the corner at the end of the block with unhurried precision, and then the sound of them faded. Maris watched the taillights until they disappeared. 5 minutes later, they came back. This time, there were 4. At 6:20, Cade Mercer knocked on her front door. She opened it before he knocked twice. The cold came in around him, dense, Still, the particular cold of a Tennessee dawn that hasn't decided yet whether it's going to get worse. He was wearing the same jacket, or one exactly like it. The iron veil patch on his back caught the porch light. He looked at her for a moment. She looked at him. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No." He nodded like that was the right answer, or at least the expected one. He had a paper cup of coffee in each hand. He held one out. She took it. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. He came through the door and stood in her mother's kitchen, which was small and worn and had a crack in the backsplash tile that she'd been meaning to fix for 8 months, and he looked at the opened letters spread across the kitchen table. She hadn't moved them, without touching them, without commenting, the way a person looks at evidence. "How many of them from Meridian?" he said. 5, plus the ones from the hospital directly, plus one from a secondary collector that bought part of the debt. She stopped. "It's more complicated than I made it sound on the phone." Debt always is. He sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. Not rude, just the movement of a man who understood that standing in doorways was a way of not committing to being somewhere, and he'd already committed. He picked up one of the letters and read it. His expression didn't change. She sat across from him. "Your mother's name was Carol," he said. "How do you—" He turned the letter so she could see. Carol A. Rowan, deceased, estate of. The account had originated in her mother's name and transferred to Maris during probate because she'd signed something she hadn't fully understood at the time in a hospital hallway 3 days before her mother died, when a woman from the billing department had explained it as a formality. "They walked you into it," Cade said. "I know that now." He set the letter down. He drank his coffee. Outside, the sound of engines had multiplied again. She could hear them clearly now, a low, persistent presence that was getting less distant by the minute. "Who's out there?" she said. "People I called." "How many people?" He looked at his cup. "More than I expected, honestly." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means word traveled." He looked up at her. "I put the call out to 3 chapter presidents I trust. By midnight, it had gone to 6 more. I don't know exactly how many are coming. I stopped getting updates around 2 in the morning." Maris set her own cup down. Her hands were steadier than they'd been last night, but not entirely steady. "Cade, I called you because I don't know why I called you. I told myself you left the card, I was in trouble. It made a kind of sense. But I wasn't asking for—" She gestured toward the window, toward the sound outside. "This. I know you weren't." "So why?" "Because I decided to. The simplicity of it. No performance. You don't have to do anything with it you don't want to. But they're already here, and they came a long way, and what they're going to do is help. If you let them." "Help how?" He picked up Preston Hale's embossed card from the table. He read the name. Something moved behind his eyes. "We have a lawyer," he said. "Vera Chow. She does this for us. Legal work, contracts, debt cases. She's driven up from Memphis. She'll be here by 8. I can't afford a lawyer. She's not billing you. I can't accept Maris." His voice didn't go hard exactly, but it stopped her. He waited a beat. "Let me tell you something about how this works. Nobody in Iron Vale does anything out of charity. That word doesn't mean much to us. What we do because we made a decision about what kind of people we are. And one of those decisions, a long time ago, was that when somebody's getting crushed by something they didn't deserve, and we have the ability to do something about it, we do something about it." He set Hale's card back on the table. "That's not charity. That's just how we're built." She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet except for the engines outside, which had gotten close enough now that she could feel them in the floor. "You're built that way," she said. "Or you built yourself that way." He held her gaze. "Both," he said. "Sometimes they're the same thing." She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window. The sky was starting to come light at the edges, gray and flat and vast. "My neighbors are going to be terrified," she said. "Probably. This town is people are going to talk." "They're going to do that anyway," he said. Hale made sure of that yesterday. She thought about the diner, about Ray Desmond looking at the television, about every face that had quietly returned to its own business while she stood there being dismantled in front of them. "Okay," she said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He finished his coffee and stood and went to the front door, and before he opened it, he looked back at her once. Not the look of a man who needed to say something. The look of a man making sure she was still standing. She was. He went outside. Maris Rowan sat alone at her kitchen table in her dead mother's house, surrounded by debt she didn't deserve. And she listened to the sound of engines assembling on the highway at the edge of town, and she thought, this is either the best decision I've ever made or the worst. She got up, went to the bedroom, and put on her work clothes. Because whatever happened next, the diner opened at 7. Well, the first real problem arrived at 7:45 a.m., and his name was Danny Greer. He came into the diner with the energy of a man who'd been awake since before dawn, processing something that disturbed him, which in this case was the sound of motorcycle engines on every road leading into Harlan's Creek, and the sight of iron veil patches appearing on the edges of town like something the night had deposited. He was 43, ex-county sheriff's deputy, currently running a one-man private security operation out of a strip mall office on Oak Street, and he'd been doing quiet and largely unasked-for protective work around town for the past decade in the way some men do after they leave institutional authority, not because anyone hired them, but because the alternative is having no purpose. He sat at the counter and looked at Maris with the expression of a man who needed answers and was not sure he was going to get ones he liked. "You know anything about what's going on out on Route 9?" he said. "Morning, Danny. Coffee?" "Don't. Maris. Come on. My neighbor called me at 4 in the morning because there were motorcycles on her street. My neighbor, Betty Helms, who is 71 years old and nearly had a cardiac event. Betty Helms thinks the mailman is suspicious. This isn't..." He lowered his voice. "There are a lot of them. Iron Veil MC. You know what that is?" "I know what it is." He stared at her. "How do you know what it is?" She poured his coffee. "They're not here to hurt anyone, Danny." "How do you know that?" "Because I called them." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man recalibrating everything he thought he'd understood about a situation. She watched it happen in his face. The reorder, the new arrangement of what he was looking at. "You called them," he said. "Preston Hale came in here yesterday afternoon and told me in front of a full lunch crowd that he was taking the diner and the house. 30 days. She kept her voice level, factual. Nobody in this room said but a word. "You want to talk to me about what's concerning, Danny? Let's talk about that first." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. He looked at the counter. "I didn't know about Hale," he said. "You would have if you'd been here." "I'm not..." He stopped, restarted. "I'm not your enemy, Maris. I know you're not." She meant it. "But I needed help and this town wasn't providing it, so I found it somewhere else." He drank his coffee. He didn't look entirely satisfied, but he didn't push further. Danny Greer was a man who understood, at some fundamental level, the difference between a problem he was positioned to fix and a problem he wasn't. He stayed for 20 minutes, said very little, left a decent tip, and walked out. She watched him through the window. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looked left toward the sound of distant engines, and then got in his truck and sat there for a while before driving away. She didn't know what he was going to do with what she'd told him. She added it to the list of things she couldn't control. By 9 in the morning, Vera Chow was sitting across from Maris in the back booth with a black coffee and a laptop and a legal pad she wrote on with a mechanical pencil. She kept clicking even when she wasn't writing anything, which was a habit that Maris found oddly reassuring, like watching someone think with their hands. Vera was 47. Small and precise and entirely at ease in her own authority, in the way of someone who'd had to establish that authority by force, repeatedly, in rooms where it wasn't initially granted. She wore a gray blazer and boots, and her hair pulled back, and she read every document Maris handed her with the absolute focused attention of someone who read for money and read very well. She asked questions, specific ones. Maris answered them. After 40 minutes, Vera set her pencil down. "The transfer of liability during probate," she said. "The form you signed in the hospital." The billing woman said it was standard. "It's not standard, it's a tactic." Vera turned her laptop to show Maris a document on the screen. Meridian Credit Services has a pattern. They identify estate situations, family member dying, surviving relative under stress, signatures obtained before the estate is formally closed. The liability transfer they walked you into wasn't legally necessary. It was constructed. Maris looked at the document, then at Vera. Can you prove that? I can prove it without 3 days of work. Vera picked up her pencil again. I need records from the hospital billing department, the original Meridian account agreement, and the probate filing. Do you have copies? Some, not all. I'll get what you don't have. Vera closed the laptop. Here's what I need you to understand, Maris. This isn't a simple debt case. If the pattern holds, and I've seen this pattern 4 times in the past 2 years, with Meridian specifically, there may be grounds for fraud. That changes everything. Fraud against me, fraud against you, and potentially against others. Vera looked at her steadily. Which means federal interest is possible, which means Hale's 30-day clock may not be the timeline that matters. Maris sat with that for a moment. Through the diner's front window, she could see the parking lot, and beyond it, Route 9. And on the shoulder of Route 9, 3 motorcycles parked in a row. The riders were standing outside talking, coffee cups in hand, watching traffic in the unhurried way of people who were comfortable being visible. The lunch crowd that was beginning to trickle in kept glancing at them. Is she good? Maris said. Who? Vera. How good is she? Vera looked up. I'm sitting right here. I know. A slight pause. Then Vera said, with the faintest dry edge, I'm good enough that Cade Mercer flew me from Memphis to Nashville and drove me 2 hours on a Sunday morning, and I came. Make of that what you will. The trouble that had been building under the surface broke open at 11:40 a.m. in the parking lot of Clyde's Diner, and Maris saw it coming about 30 seconds before it happened and was not able to stop it. There were 6 Iron Veil members outside, 3 she'd noticed earlier, plus 3 more who'd arrived around 10. They'd been quiet, unobtrusive, maintaining a presence that was visible without being threatening. A couple of them had come in for coffee. One, a massive man with a gray beard and a prosthetic left arm, who'd introduced himself only as Beryl, had sat at the counter for an hour and talked to Maris about Tennessee weather with the ease of someone who talked to strangers for a living, which she suspected he did not. At 11:40, a white pickup truck pulled into the lot and sat there for a moment with its engine running. Then Derek Calloway got out. He was not alone. He had 2 men with him she didn't know, bigger than him, wearing the particular expression of men who'd been told something was going to be easy. And he had, tucked in the front of his jeans in a way that he clearly wanted visible, the grip of a pistol. She was at the window. She saw it. Her stomach dropped. The 6 Iron Veil members outside had seen it too. She could tell by the quality of stillness that moved through them. Not the stillness of surprise, but the stillness of people making rapid internal calculations, adjusting to a situation, taking positions without appearing to take positions. Beryl was still at the counter. He'd gone very quiet. She started toward the door. Don't, Beryl said. He's going to... I know what he's going to do. He didn't look at her. He was looking through the window. Stay inside. That's my parking lot. Maris. He said her name with the specific weight of someone who didn't use names casually. Please. She stayed. She stood at the window with her hand flat against the glass, and she watched. Derek walked toward the nearest 2 Iron Veil members. A man she'd heard called Priest, lean and watchful with a scar across his collarbone visible above his collar, and a younger rider she didn't know. Derek stopped about 10 feet from them, close enough to be confrontational, far enough to be technically non-threatening. You all need to move on, he said, loud enough to carry, playing for the street. Priest looked at him. He said nothing. This is a private town, Derek said. We don't need outside. Nobody asked what you need, Priest said. Quiet. Just the 2 words. Derek's jaw tightened. He put his hand near the pistol grip. Not on it. Near it. I'm giving you one chance to... Cade came around the corner of the building. He hadn't been visible before. Hadn't been in the lot when Derek pulled in. He appeared from the side alley between the diner and the hardware store next door, moving without hurry, and the specific quality of his arrival changed the whole dynamic of the parking lot the way a stone changes water. He walked to a point about 15 feet from Derek, and he stopped, and he looked at Derek Calloway for a long moment with those exhausted gray-brown eyes, and he said, Put your hand somewhere else. Derek's hand didn't move. I'm not asking twice, Cade said. The 2 men behind Derek shifted. Priest had moved, subtly, an angle change, a body adjustment that wasn't threatening but altered his position relative to Derek's friends. The other Iron Veil members had done the same without appearing to do anything. Maris watched Derek Calloway's face go through 3 different calculations in 3 seconds. His hand moved away from the gun. Cade looked at him for a moment longer. Then, "You want to tell me what you think is happening here?" "You people—" "Careful," Cade said. Not a threat, a warning. The difference mattered. Derek's chin went up. "I don't know what she told you. I don't know what she said she needs. But whatever it is, it's not your business. This is our town." "She's your neighbor," Cade said. "You watched a man come in here yesterday and put a gun to her life in front of 30 people. Where were you for that?" Derek said nothing. "So you weren't protecting yesterday," Cade said. "You're not protecting anything today. You're just bothered that something's here you didn't invite." He looked at the truck, at Derek's 2 friends, then back. "Get in your truck, Derek. Go home. This doesn't have to be anything." A long pause. Derek Calloway got in his truck. His 2 friends got in the truck. The truck backed out of the lot and drove away. The parking lot exhaled. Beryl, at the counter behind Maris, said quietly, "Okay." She turned from the window. Her heart was running at about twice its normal rate, and her hands were not as steady as she would have liked. "Does that happen a lot?" she said. "Often enough," Beryl said. He picked up his coffee. "Cade usually handles it before it gets to the gun part." He had a gun. He had a gun he wasn't going to use. There's a difference. She wasn't sure she had the experience to recognize that difference. She filed it away. Well, the afternoon brought more of them. Not all at once. In pairs and small groups, rolling in off the highway with the unhurried consistency of a tide coming in. By 3 o'clock, there were close to 40 motorcycles visible from the diner windows. They were setting up in the field behind the Grain Street Church. She'd heard this from customers who'd been driving past, whose voices carried the particular mix of alarm and fascination that comes from watching something unprecedented unfold in a town where nothing unprecedented ever happened. People were talking. Of course they were talking. Harlan's Creek was a place where the primary industry was other people's business, and what was currently happening on Grain Street represented a surplus. So overwhelming, it was practically civic infrastructure. She got reports throughout the afternoon like dispatches from a foreign country. Tents, a camp kitchen being assembled, motorcycles parked in organized rows, men sitting in camp chairs talking, some of them older, late 50s, 60s, white-haired and slow-moving, but with that particular bearing that never quite leaves, like structure baked into bone. At least 3 women she heard about, wearing iron veil patches, one of them apparently directing the kitchen setup with a level of organizational authority that several observers found more alarming than the motorcycles. Nobody had done anything threatening. Nobody had done anything threatening, and somehow that was the thing that was least understandable to the town. At 4:30, Cade came back into the diner. He sat in the same booth he'd sat in the first night. She brought him coffee without being asked. "How many?" she said. "Right now? About 60. More coming tonight." "From where?" "Everywhere." He looked at his coffee. Virginia chapter president brought 14 writers. Guys from the Kentucky chapter are about 2 hours out. Alabama contingent. I didn't expect them, honestly. There's a nomad who came from Oregon. Oregon. Oregon, he confirmed. She sat across from him. The diner was empty between the lunch and dinner crowds, which gave her a window she wasn't used to having. "Cade, what are they expecting to happen here?" He looked at her. "Not a fight," he said. "I want to be clear on that. Nobody came here looking for a confrontation. What they came for." He paused, and she could see him choosing his words, not from dishonesty, but from the effort of accurate description. When the call goes out, the people who answer it aren't coming because they were told to. They come because they've been in situations where they needed people to show up, and it mattered when people did. This is just the other side of that. You needed help. Word got out. People came. "That's not how anything works," she said. "It's how we work." She looked at him. The afternoon light was low and cold through the windows. Outside, Route 9 was visible, and on it 2 more motorcycles had just passed, heading toward Grain Street. "What happened to you?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "That's a long question." "I know it is." "I'll give you the short version," he said, "because we don't have time for the long one." He turned his coffee cup on the table, a slow rotation. "I spent 11 years in the Army. Combat deployment twice, once in my 20s, once in my 30s, which is too old for it in ways that nobody tells you before you go. Came back the second time and spent about 2 years being angry about things. I couldn't explain and not sleeping and pushing away every person who tried to be useful. He stopped rotating the cup. Iron Veil found me. Or I found them. It was one of those things that goes both ways. And what they gave me wasn't a cure for anything. I'm not going to tell you I'm fixed. But they gave me people who didn't need me to explain what was wrong, who just sat with it, did the thing. He looked up at her. That's what's out there on Grain Street, people who learn to do the thing. Maris looked at him for a long moment. And what's the thing here? She said. Specifically, what are 60 people from 6 states going to do about a debt collection company and a 30-day notice? Vera's working the legal angle. The rest... He stopped. Something crossed his face. Not doubt. Something more complicated. There's something you should know. She waited. I've seen this before, he said. Meridian Credit Services. Not in Tennessee. In West Virginia, about 3 years ago. A family, older couple, similar situation. Medical debt, predatory transfer, pressure campaign. What happened? They lost the house, he said. We got there late. 3 days after the enforcement. The diner was very quiet. I wasn't going to get there late again, he said. Maris sat with that. Outside, the late afternoon was going dark at the edges, and the sound of engines was a constant, low presence in the air. Vera thinks there might be fraud, she said. Federal interest. I know. She called me after she talked to you. He finally drank his coffee. But federal interest takes time. Investigations take time. Hale's 30-day clock doesn't wait for investigations. So what do we do about the 30 days? He set the cup down. He looked at her with the patient directness of a man who had learned, through considerable damage, that the truth was less painful than the alternative. We make Hale understand, he said slowly, that there are 60 people, probably more by tomorrow morning, between him and that enforcement. Not violently, not through threats, just present, immovably present. We make the legal case airtight enough that moving on it becomes the more expensive option. He paused. And there's something else. What? Beryl found something this afternoon, while he was sitting here. He was sitting here for an hour drinking coffee. He was also working his phone. Cade pulled out a folded paper and set it on the table between them. Meridian Credit Services, the West Virginia case I mentioned, and a case in eastern Kentucky 8 months ago, and a case in northern Georgia 4 months ago. He tapped the paper. Same pattern, same timeline, same pressure tactics, same form pushed at grieving family members in hospital hallways. She looked at the paper. Names, dates, account numbers, 4 cases including hers. They've done this before, she said. They've done this systematically, he said. That's not the same thing. Systematic is what makes it federal. Vera needs this. I know. I'm going to walk it over to her after this. She stared at the paper. 4 families. The couple in West Virginia who'd lost their house 3 days before anyone got there. The name at the top of that entry was printed in the clean, neutral font of a document, but it represented something that was not clean and not neutral. A life disrupted, a home lost, grief exploited. She thought about the form she'd signed in the hospital hallway. The billing woman's kind, professional face. The way she'd said standard like it was a comfort. Something cold moved through her chest. Not fear exactly. Closer to the specific anger that comes when you realize you weren't stupid. You were targeted. There are 4 cases here, she said. How many more? Cade was quiet for a moment. That's what Vera's going to spend tonight finding out, he said. Maris folded her hands on the table. She looked at the paper. She looked at Cade. If there are more, she said carefully, this isn't just about my house. No, he said. It's not. This is bigger than what I called you about. Yes. She sat with that. The kitchen sounds behind her. Lou, her evening cook, arriving for the dinner shift. The sound of the grill warming up, familiar and grounding. Outside, Route 9 in the failing light. And somewhere on Grain Street, 60 people from 6 states sitting around campfires in the cold because one woman made one phone call at midnight. She thought about what Cade had said about the couple in West Virginia. 3 days late. She thought about Preston Hale in his polished shoes, in his tailored suit, carrying his leather portfolio through the lunch crowd without a tremor. "I want to be in the room," she said, "when Vera presents whatever she finds. I want to know everything." "That's your right. I want to talk to the other people, the other families, if there are more." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, slight, but she caught it. "What?" she said. "Nothing." "Then, you're different than I expected." "What did you expect?" He considered. "Someone waiting to be saved." She held his gaze. "I'm not waiting for anything. I know that now." She stood. She picked up his coffee cup and refilled it from the pot she'd brought over. She set it back down. "Dinner rush starts in 20 minutes, she said. "You should eat something." He looked at the menu on the table, which he definitely already knew by heart at this point, and said, "What's the soup today?" "Chicken and rice. Lou makes it better on Mondays." "It's Sunday." "I know, but he makes it on Sundays too when he's in a good mood." The edge of something crossed Cade's face, not quite a smile, the shape of one. "Chicken soup, then," he said. She went back behind the counter. The dinner crowd was starting to come in, more of them than usual, she noticed. People who were curious, people who'd heard things and wanted to see for themselves. She recognized faces she hadn't seen in the diner in months, neighbors, people who'd looked away yesterday. She took their orders, she brought their food. She smiled when it was required and didn't when it wasn't. Around her in the kitchen, Lou moved efficiently at the grill. The coffee pot cycled. The bell above the door chimed with the reliable rhythm of a place that people needed. She was refilling booth 2 when the bell chimed again, and she looked up without thinking. It was not a customer. It was a man she didn't recognize, 50s, road-worn, iron veil patch, moving through the door with the practiced efficiency of someone delivering a message rather than arriving for any other purpose. He went straight to Cade's booth and sat down without greeting and put a phone on the table between them. Cade looked at the phone, then at the man. The man said something in a voice too low for Maris to hear. She watched Cade's face. Whatever he heard made something change in him. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't watching closely, but she was watching closely, and what she saw was a stillness that was different from his usual stillness. This was the stillness of a man absorbing a blow. He picked up the phone, read what was on the screen. He set it down. He looked across the diner to where Maris was standing with the coffee pot, and his eyes met hers, and in the space of that look she understood that something had changed, that the thing they'd been building, the legal case, the careful strategy, the 60 people on Grain Street, had just become more complicated. The man with the message leaned forward and said something else. Cade's jaw set. "How sure?" he said. The man said something she couldn't hear. Cade closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them and looked at her again, and this time he stood up from the booth. And the way he moved toward her, deliberate, steady, the way he moved when the thing required steadiness, made the coffee pot feel suddenly very heavy in her hand. He stopped 2 feet from her. "Vera needs us both," he said. "Right now." "What happened?" He looked at her for a moment with something in his face that she would later identify as the expression of a man who had spent a long time learning to deliver bad news directly. "Preston Hale filed the enforcement papers this afternoon," he said. "Not in 30 days. Now." He moved the timeline. Maris felt the words land in her chest. "He can't." Vera said the timeline. "He found a secondary clause in the lien agreement. She's reading it now." His voice was level, careful. "But that's not the part that changes everything." "What's the part that changes everything?" He held her gaze. "The secondary collector, the one that bought part of the debt. Beryl traced the ownership this afternoon while he was sitting here, through 3 shell companies." He paused. "Maris, Preston Hale doesn't work for Meridian Credit Services." She stared at him. "Preston Hale is Meridian Credit Services," he said. "He owns it, has owned it for 9 years through a holding structure. He's not a debt collector. He's a predator who built a machine specifically to do what was done to you and those other families. And he's been operating it out of offices in 4 states. And the reason he's moving the enforcement tonight instead of waiting," Cade stopped, "is because somebody tipped him off." The coffee pot was very heavy. "Tipped him off," she said slowly. "That you all are here." "Yes." "That Vera is here." "Yes." She looked at the diner around her, the dinner crowd, the faces she recognized, Lou at the grill, the bell above the door. Someone in this town, she said. Someone in this town, he confirmed. And somewhere outside on Grain Street, 60 people who had come a long way were sitting around fires in the cold. And the thing they'd all come here to stop had just accelerated past the point where careful strategy and 30-day timelines were going to be enough. And if Vera didn't find the angle in the next few hours, by morning there might be nothing left to protect. Part 3. Vera. Cheo's temporary office was the back room of the diner, a space that had been a storage room for most of its life and still smelled like it. Flour and cardboard and old coffee, a single overhead bulb throwing flat yellow light over a folding table covered in documents. She'd taken it over 2 hours ago with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that the quality of a workspace was less important than the quality of attention brought to it, and by the time Cade brought Maris back there at 6:47 p.m., Vera had turned it into something that looked less like a storage room and more like a war room. Papers sorted into columns, laptop open, phone face up, and already lit with missed calls she hadn't returned. She looked up when they came in. "Sit," she said. They sat. Cade took the chair against the wall. Maris took the one across from Vera, and the folding table between them held the weight of everything that was about to be said. "The secondary clause he used," Vera started, and her voice had the particular quality of someone reporting from inside a situation rather than outside it. Tight, precise, stripped of anything that wasn't information. "It's legitimate, technically. The Lion Agreement your mother signed with the original hospital had a provision buried in Section 14, Acceleration Clause, triggered by what the agreement calls material change in estate circumstances. The hospital's legal team wrote it. Standard boilerplate, they'll say. But Meridian purchased that debt with full knowledge of the clause and specifically waited for a moment when they could argue the estate circumstances had materially changed." "What change?" Maris said. "You." Vera looked at her steadily. "The probate transfer they walked you into. The moment you signed that form in the hospital hallway, the debt moved from your mother's estate, which had formal legal protections and a timeline, into your name as an individual, and the clause restarted." Maris let that land. The form. The kind-faced woman. The word standard. "So they created the triggering condition themselves," she said. "Yes." "And then triggered it." "Yes." Cade was looking at the wall. Not absent. The opposite. The expression of a man absorbing information in the particular way that comes before a decision. "Can we fight the clause?" Maris said. "The clause itself, in the time we have? No, not tonight." Vera picked up her pencil. "What we can fight is the probate transfer. If I can demonstrate that the transfer was obtained through misrepresentation, everything that followed from it is poisoned. The clause doesn't apply. The acceleration doesn't apply. The enforcement filing becomes void." "How long does that take?" "Under normal circumstances, weeks, months." "We don't have weeks." "I know." Vera clicked the pencil 3 times in quick succession. "I filed an emergency motion 2 hours ago with the Federal District Court in Nashville. Temporary restraining order on the enforcement, based on the fraud evidence Beryl assembled. The judge is—" She glanced at her phone. "I'm waiting." "What are the odds?" Cade said. "From the wall." Vera looked at him. "Better than they were this morning. The 4-case pattern helped. The shell company structure helped more." She paused. "There's something else." Maris watched Vera's face. Something there. Not hesitation exactly, but the quality of a person who has learned information that changes the shape of everything and is now deciding how to present it. "The holding company that owns Meridian Credit Services," Vera said. "Beryl traced it through 3 shells, as you know. KVR Holdings, based in Delaware, through a Cayman structure, ultimately controlled by a man named Carlton Voss." "I don't know that name," Maris said. "No. But Carlton Voss has been operating debt acquisition businesses in the southeastern United States for 14 years, under various names. Meridian is his 4th iteration. The previous 3 were dissolved when regulatory attention got close." Vera turned her laptop screen to face them. "I started pulling his other cases this afternoon. The pattern I found with your 4 cases, Maris, there are 31. The number sat in the room. 31 families, Maris said. 31 that I can document in the past 3 years. The full history goes back further." Vera turned the laptop back. And here is what changes everything tonight. She took a breath, a small one. Carlton Voss has a business partner, a local one in every market he operates. Someone with community knowledge, who knows which families are in medical distress, who's recently lost someone, who owns property worth targeting. In West Virginia, it was a hospital administrator. In Kentucky, it was a county clerk. And in Harlan's Creek, she stopped. She slid a paper across the table to Maris. Maris looked at it. A document, a consulting agreement, 2 signatures at the bottom. One was Carlton Voss. The other was a name she knew. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. "That's impossible," she said. Vera was quiet. "This is—" Maris stopped, looked again. "Frank Abelard has been the county clerk here for 12 years. His wife used to bring my mother soup when she got sick. He was at the funeral. I was at the—" She stopped again. Kate had turned from the wall. He was looking at the paper in her hands. "He identified you," Vera said carefully. "The consulting agreement. He received a fee for providing referrals, specific profiles, families with medical debt, property owned outright or nearly, recent bereavement. He knew your situation intimately because county probate records passed through his office." Maris set the paper down. She did not say anything for a long moment. The overhead bulb buzzed. From outside the diner, the sounds of the evening were audible. The kitchen, Lou, and the grill, the murmur of the dinner crowd that didn't know anything was happening back here. "Frank Abelard was at my mother's funeral," she said again. "I know," Vera said. "He shook my hand. He said he was sorry." Vera didn't say anything. Cade was still looking at the paper. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "The tip-off. When Hale moved the timeline tonight, Abelard told him we were here, told him Vera was here." "Almost certainly," Vera said. "And Hale moved because he knows if Vera gets the fraud case in front of a federal judge before the enforcement executes, the whole structure collapses." Cade stood up from the chair. He moved to the window, a high, narrow one looking out at the back of the property, and stood there with his back to them. "So he's not just filing tonight to beat our timeline. He's filing tonight because Abelard told him we know." "Yes," Vera said. Maris was looking at the consulting agreement. The fee listed was $4,000. $4,000 for her name, her address, the details of her mother's death, the nature of her debt, the fact of the house on Crestline Street. $4,000 to send Preston Hale through her door. Her mother's soup. The sympathy on Frank Abelard's face at the graveside. Something in her chest did something she didn't have a word for. It was larger and colder than anger. It was the specific devastation of discovering that a wound you thought was accidental was actually aimed. "Maris," Cade said, still at the window. "I'm fine," she said. He turned and looked at her. He did not argue with her assessment, but he also did not appear to believe it, which she supposed was appropriate. "Vera," he said, "what do you need right now, tonight?" "The original hospital billing agreement, the one Carol Rowan signed, not the probate transfer. I need to show the document chain. If I can prove the billing department worked in coordination with Meridian, which the timeline suggests, the fraud case becomes federal, not civil, and the TRO application gets substantially stronger." She looked at Maris. "Would your mother have kept a copy?" Maris thought. "She kept everything. There's a box. At the house. In the bedroom closet." "Can you get it tonight?" "I can get it right now." "I'll come with you," Cade said. "You don't need to—" "I know," he said. Same quality as before. Not argument, decision. She looked at him for a moment. Then she took her apron off and set it on the folding table, and she and Cade moved through the kitchen and out the back door into the cold. The night was clear now. The remnant rain had stopped. The clouds pulled back to reveal a sky that was sharp and indifferent. Stars visible in the way. They're only visible when you're far enough from city light that the darkness is actual darkness. The temperature had dropped to the kind of cold that goes through a jacket and keeps going. Their breath showed white in the parking lot light. They rode in her Civic. She drove. He was too large for the passenger seat in a way that would have been comic under different circumstances. Neither of them spoke for the first 4 minutes. Then Maris said, "Did you know this kind of thing existed, organized like this?" Cade looked out the passenger window at the dark streets of Harlan's Creek. "I knew debt abuse existed. I didn't know it had this kind of infrastructure. But it doesn't surprise you. A pause. No. Why not? He turned the question over. Because when you spend enough time around people who've been damaged by systems, the VA, the court system, debt systems, housing systems, you stop being surprised by how much sophistication goes into the damage. The randomness of it is the myth. Most damage is designed. She thought about that. The house on Crestline, the form in the hospital hallway, Frank Abelard's face at her mother's graveside. I thought I was unlucky, she said. You were targeted, he said, which is different and worse, and also more actionable. She pulled on to Crestline Street. The house sat dark in its lot, the porch light on the timer clicking on as she turned in, throwing the small front yard into relief. She was halfway up the porch steps when she felt Cade's hand on her arm. Light, immediate. She stopped. He was looking at the front door. She looked at it too. It was closed, locked, as she'd left it. What? She said. The storm door, he said quietly. She looked at the storm door. It was slightly ajar. She kept it latched. It banged in wind, annoyed her. And she had latched it this morning, as she always did. Cade moved past her without a word. He tried the storm door, which swung open. He tried the front door, which did not. Still locked. He stepped back and looked at the house. Windows, side yard, the narrow gap between her place and the neighbors. He was doing something with his eyes that she could only describe as reading. Probably wind, she said. He said nothing. Cade. Give me your keys, he said. She gave them to him. He unlocked the front door and opened it and stood for a moment in the doorway before he went in. She stayed on the porch because something in the quality of his movement told her to, and she'd learned, fast, to read that quality. 30 seconds. He came back to the door. Come in, he said. But stay close. She came in. The house looked like her house. Same kitchen table with the letters. She'd taken all Vera needed, left the rest. Same crack in the backsplash tile. But something felt altered in the way a room feels altered when someone has moved through it carefully and tried to leave no mark. And something is slightly wrong in the arrangement of ordinary objects that you notice only because you live here and you know where everything is. Someone was in here, she said. It wasn't a question. Recently, he said. Maybe an hour ago. She felt the cold go through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. They didn't take anything. They weren't looking for things to take. He was in the hallway, looking at the door to the bedroom. They were looking for documents. Vera's case. Hale knows she's building it. He needed to know how far along it was. She thought of the letters on the kitchen table. The letters she'd finally opened. Everything Vera had seen. The bedroom closet, she said. She moved past him and into the bedroom, and she opened the closet. Her mother's 3 dresses hung at the far end, undisturbed. She reached up to the high shelf and found the banker's box she'd put up there after the funeral, financial records, medical documents, Carol Rowan's careful, organized record of her own dying. She pulled it down. She went through it fast. Medical agreements, insurance documents, bills. There. The original hospital billing agreement. Carol A. Rowan, dated 18 months ago. 3 pages. A signature at the bottom in her mother's careful, slanted handwriting. She held it up. Cade was in the doorway. Vera needs that tonight, he said. I know. She put the document in the inside pocket of her jacket. She put the box back on the shelf. She stood in the closet for a moment, her hand resting near her mother's dresses. The fabric held nothing she could identify, no scent remaining, only the fact of itself, the presence of something chosen and kept. She closed the closet. She turned around. Cade was watching her with the patient, undemanding attention of someone who understood that certain moments required witness without comment. She walked past him toward the front door. Let's go, she said. Well, the call came at 9:22 p.m. They were 5 minutes from the diner when Cade's phone went. He looked at the screen. Something shifted in his face and answered. He listened, said 3 words she couldn't parse, listened again. He lowered the phone. There's a problem on Grain Street, he said. What kind of problem? I need to get there. She turned the car. The field behind Grain Street had been transformed in ways that were visible even in the dark. The organized rows of motorcycles, the camp lights strung between temporary poles, The kitchen structure still operating, fire pits with people gathered around them in the cold. It would have looked like a well-organized rally under other circumstances. Under these circumstances, it looked like what it was, an encampment preparing for something that had not been named yet. She pulled to the edge of the field. They got out. A man came toward them immediately. She recognized him, one of the chapter presidents she'd seen earlier, a man named Donovan Reese who ran the Virginia contingent, 50s, serious face, moving with urgency. "They arrested Beryl," he said to Cade. The field had gone quiet in the way fields go quiet when something has happened and word is spreading outward from the center. "On what?" Cade said. "Disorderly conduct, which is—" Reese shook his head. "It's nonsense. He was sitting in the parking lot on his bike. Local deputy came out, said he'd received a complaint. Beryl told him what he thought of that, which, you know how Beryl is." "Yeah." "It's not the arrest," Reese said. His voice dropped. "The deputy who made the arrest. Danny Greer." Maris went still. Cade looked at her. "He came to the diner this morning," she said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "I told him about the Iron Veil. I told him they were here because I called them." Cade held her gaze for a moment. Not accusation, calculation. "He's the leak," Reese said. "Had to be. He's the one who tipped Hale about Vera." "I don't—" Maris stopped. Thought about Danny Greer at the counter, his coffee cup, the careful questions, the way he'd sat in his truck in the parking lot afterward. Danny's not a bad person. He doesn't have to be a bad person, Cade said quietly. He just has to know Hale. Know someone who knows Hale. Make one phone call without understanding what it set in motion. He paused. Or understanding exactly what it set in motion. "You don't know which one it is." "Not yet." They were moving through the field now toward the center of camp where a group had assembled near the largest fire. She could hear the quality of conversation, tight, controlled, the particular sound of people managing frustration through discipline. Beryl was not in the camp. In the county lockup, presumably, which was a situation that had a solution, but the solution required hours. Around the fire, Priest, the lean, watchful man. 3 women. She could now see them clearly. The one who'd organized the kitchen, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s named Cora, and 2 younger riders she hadn't been introduced to. The man who'd brought the message to the diner earlier, whose name she still didn't know. 2 more chapter presidents whose names she was keeping track of by face because she hadn't had time to learn all of them yet. Cade stood at the edge of the fire circle. He did not perform leadership. He simply arrived, and the conversation adjusted around him, and people waited. "Beryl's handled," he said. "Dex, you and Cal go down to the county office, post the bond, wait for him. Don't argue with anyone. Don't make statements." He looked around. "Here's where we are. Hale filed tonight. Vera has an emergency TRO application in front of a federal judge in Nashville. While we're waiting on that, we stay exactly where we are. Nobody leaves. Nobody escalates. Nobody gives any law enforcement in this county any reason to make more arrests. You understand me?" A ripple of acknowledgement moved through the circle. "There's something else," Cade said. He paused. She watched him decide how much to give them. "The person who tipped Hale off. It may be someone Maris spoke to in confidence this morning. That's not her fault. That's on Hale for having people in position. I'm telling you because some of you are going to hear it, and I'd rather you hear it from me than from rumor." He looked around the circle. "It doesn't change what we're doing. It does mean we keep information about Vera's case inside the people who need to know it. Nothing goes outside that circle." Nods. Silence. The fire cracking. Then Priest said from across the fire, "Cade." The quality of his voice made everyone listen. "Go ahead," Cade said. Priest looked at him steadily. "The Oregon nomad. Whitmore." "What about him?" "He pulled out at 6 o'clock, said he had personal business." "Whitmore doesn't pull out," someone said from the back. "No," Priest agreed. "He doesn't." Cade was very still. "Did he say where he was going?" Cade said. "Said he was going to resolve something," Priest said. "Those were his exact words. Resolve something." The fire was the only sound for a moment. Maris was aware of the specific quality of what was happening among these people. Not panic, not confusion, but the rapid and disciplined processing of a potential crisis among people who had experience with potential crises and knew that the window between potential and actual was sometimes shorter than anyone wanted. Get him on the phone, Cade said. He's not picking up. Cade turned and walked away from the fire. Maris followed without being asked, because the alternative was standing at the fire circle learning things secondhand. He stopped near the motorcycles, the organized rows of them, chrome catching firelight. He called a number. It rang. He tried again. "Damn it," he said quietly. "Who is Whitmore?" she said. He looked at her. "A man who's been part of this organization for 11 years, who's never created a problem before." He paused. "Who also lost a brother to a predatory debt scheme in 2019. House repossession, Oregon. His brother had a heart attack 3 days after the eviction." She felt something cold move through her chest. "He didn't come here for me," she said slowly. "He came for the right reasons," Cade said. And his voice had that careful, precise quality of a man who is managing his own reaction very tightly. "But resolve something is not a phrase I want from a man with his history, on a night when Preston Hale is in this town." Maris was quiet. "If Whitmore goes near Hale—" Cade stopped. "Everything falls apart," she said. "Everything we're trying to do legally. Everything Vera's built. Any judge considering the TRO sees an assault connected to Iron Veil, and the case dies before it breathes." He tried the number again. Nothing. He lowered the phone. "Where's Hale staying?" "I don't know. He came from Nashville. He'd be at the Millway Inn. It's the only hotel." Cade was already walking toward the bikes. "I need to get there before Whitmore does." "You don't know that's where he's going?" "No," Cade said. "I don't." He stopped at his bike and looked at her. The firelight was behind her and his face was in relative shadow. "Go back to Vera. Give her the document. Don't say anything to anyone about Whitmore. Not yet." He paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes." He looked at her for one moment with that steady, exhausted regard. Then he kicked the Harley to life, and it split the night wide open, the sound of it rolling across the field and up into the dark sky. And then he was out of the field and onto the road, and the sound of him diminished and was gone. Maris stood in the field among the rows of motorcycles with her hand pressed flat against the outside of her jacket, feeling the folded document through the fabric. Around her, the camp had reconfigured, people moving with purpose, the arrested Bond situation being handled, conversations happening in clusters with the low, controlled energy of people who knew how to function under pressure. She was not one of these people. She had never been trained for this, had never wanted to be, had not imagined 12 days ago, standing in a field in Tennessee at 10 o'clock at night with someone else's crisis intersecting with hers in ways she couldn't fully map. She walked back to the car. She drove back to the diner. She went in the back door and found Vera exactly where she'd left her, reading, the mechanical pencil working against the legal pad. She put the document on the table in front of Vera without explanation, and Vera picked it up and started reading, and within 30 seconds her pencil stopped moving entirely, which was the most alarmed Maris had seen her. "This is it," Vera said. "What does it give us?" "The billing coordinator's name is on here as a co-signatory on the agreement supplement." Vera was scanning fast. If she was operating under instructions from Meridian, which this document structure strongly suggests, it's not just misrepresentation, it's conspiracy. She looked up. "This is federal tonight. Where's Cade?" "He had to handle something," Maris said. "Careful." Vera studied her face for a moment with the perceptive attention of someone accustomed to knowing when they're getting a partial answer. "Okay," she said, and went back to reading. Maris sat down. She looked at the document spread across the folding table. 31 families, Frank Abelard's name on a consulting agreement, her mother's billing document with its buried conspiracy. The numbers accumulated into something so large she had to look at it sideways to hold it in her mind. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. "Ms. Rowan." A man's voice, smooth, professional. The pleasantness of the surface with nothing behind it. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her stomach turned over. "Mr. Hale," she said. Vera looked up sharply. Maris held up a hand. "I'll be brief," Preston Hale said. "I understand there's been some legal activity today, some documentation assembled. I want you to know that I have great respect for the process, and I have no wish to see this go further than it needs to." A pause. "I'm prepared to withdraw the enforcement filing tonight Full withdrawal, no penalties, debt restructured to workable terms. The folding table was very quiet. Maris held the phone. In exchange, he said. She waited. The documentation your lawyer has assembled, I'd like it withdrawn. Not destroyed. I'm not asking anything improper. Simply removed from the federal filing and held privately. You'd have the debt relief. Your home. Your diner. All of it, clean. Another pause. The pleasantness smooth and constant. The other cases, those families, are represented by other legal proceedings in other jurisdictions. Your assistance with those cases wouldn't materially change their outcomes. The document that Vera was holding. 31 families, the couple in West Virginia who'd already lost their house. Maris looked at the document, at Vera's face, which had gone entirely still. You're asking me to drop the fraud case, Maris said. I'm asking you to prioritize your own situation, which is the only reasonable thing anyone can ask of you. The pleasantness had something underneath it now. Faint, a pressure. You're a waitress in a small town, Ms. Rowan. You have enough to manage without carrying 30 other people's problems. A waitress in a small town. She'd heard that assessment in various forms for 14 months. From bank officials and billing departments and the particular quality of Ray Desmond not looking up from the television. I'll call you back, she said. I'd encourage you not to wait too. She ended the call. Vera was looking at her. He's scared, Vera said. That call means he's scared, which means the TRO application is doing exactly what it needs to. He's offering to drop the enforcement, I heard, if I pull the fraud documentation. I heard that too. Maris looked at her hands on the table, the particular smallness of them, her mother's hands. If I take his offer, she said, those 31 families, the cases in other jurisdictions are weaker without your documentation, Vera said. Some of them might survive independently, some won't. She was being honest in the way she was always honest, accurate without softening. And the next family's Voss targets through Meridian will have no protection at all. Maris was quiet. I can't make this decision for you, Vera said. I want to be clear about that. I know. You called Cade because you were desperate and frightened and you were out of options. That was a personal emergency. This, Vera paused, this is something different. I know that too. She sat at the folding table in the storage room of her dead mother's diner, and she thought about everything she knew. She thought about Frank Abelard's face at the graveside, about the billing coordinator's name on the document, about the couple in West Virginia, about Whitmore, somewhere in this town with his dead brother in his chest, resolving something, about Cade on the dark highway at midnight, riding towards something he hadn't asked for because somebody made a decision, a long time ago, about what kind of man he was going to be. She thought about what he'd said. Sometimes they're the same thing. Her phone buzzed, a text from unknown number. She opened it. A photograph. Cade. Standing outside the Millway Inn, and next to him, restrained by the arm, a man she didn't know. Lean, mid-50s, road-worn, the expression of a man who'd been about to do something and had been stopped 3 steps short of doing it. Whitmore. It had to be. Below the photograph, text. Your people are controllable. For now. But you should know. What your lawyer found about Abelard is half the story. The county clerk isn't the only official in Harlan's Creek on our payroll. The judge who will rule on the TRO application in Nashville. His brother-in-law sits on the board of KVR Holdings. We filed a motion to reassign the application 40 minutes ago. Your emergency TRO is already dead. Take my offer, or by morning, there's nothing left to protect. Maris read it twice. She set the phone on the table so Vera could see the screen. Vera read it. She read it again. Then she set the phone down and sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment with the expression of someone doing rapid, serious calculation in a field where they had considerable expertise. The judge, Vera said. Is it true? I don't know yet. She was already picking up her own phone. But if it's true, then the TRO is dead. The Nashville TRO is dead, Vera said. She was dialing. Hale's structure is in 4 states. We filed in Nashville because it was fastest. But if Nashville is compromised, she held the phone to her ear, waiting. There are other jurisdictions. It takes longer. It changes the timeline significantly. How much longer? Days. Maybe a week. The enforcement was tonight. The house. The diner. 30 days had become hours, and hours were becoming less. Vera, Maris said. The lawyer held up one finger. Someone had answered. She turned away and began speaking low and fast, words Maris couldn't follow. Maris picked up her phone. She called Cade. He answered on the second ring. I got your text, she said. Not from me, he said immediately. She went cold. What? I don't have this number. I've never texted you. His voice was taut. What text? She described it. The photograph of him and Whitmore, the message about the judge. A silence. Someone photographed us outside the inn, he said. Not to her. She could hear him processing it. 20 minutes ago. We were outside for less than 5 minutes. He stopped. Maris, listen to me. Someone has been watching us all night. Not Hale. Someone working for Hale, close enough to photograph me at the Millway Inn and send it to you within minutes. He paused. That means someone in this camp. The field behind Grain Street. 60 people from 6 states. You trust them, she said. I trust the people I know, he said. I don't know all 60 of them personally. His voice had gone very quiet. The Whitmore situation. The timing of Barrel's arrest. The tip to Hale. The photograph. Someone fed our movements all night. She thought of the camp. The organized rows of bikes. The fire circles. The chapter presidents she was still learning by face. What do I do? She said. Stay with Vera, he said. Don't tell anyone in the camp about the judge situation. Not yet. A pause. I'm coming back. The call ended. Vera was still on her phone, pacing now, the pencil gone, her voice controlled and rapid. Outside the back door of the diner, Maris could hear the kitchen, Lou, and the close of evening service. The sounds of a normal night in a building that had stood on this road for decades and had, without knowing it, become the center of something enormous. She sat in the storage room under the flat yellow bulb. She thought, there is someone in the camp who is working against everything those 60 people came here to do. Someone who photographed Cade and sent it to her phone to scare her into taking Hale's offer. Someone who knew about Beryl, who knew about Vera, who may have known about the document from the house. She thought, in the morning, Hale will move on the enforcement with a judge in his pocket and a leak in the camp and 31 families behind her, and Cade somewhere on a dark road coming back to a situation that had just become something different than any of them had prepared for. She thought about her mother's hands, small and efficient and always moving. She stood up. She found a blank sheet of paper on Vera's table. She started writing, every detail she could remember about the consulting agreement, the document chain, every name Vera had mentioned, everything she'd learned in the past 18 hours, in her own handwriting, in her own words. Because if someone was in this camp and had access to Vera's documents, and the case was about to be moved to a different jurisdiction entirely, then the only version of the truth she was certain couldn't be compromised was the one that lived in her own memory. She wrote until her hand hurt. She was still writing when the back door of the diner opened. She looked up. It was not Cade. It was a man she recognized from the camp, one of the ones she'd been tracking by face, whose name she didn't know, one of the people who'd arrived that afternoon. He was standing in the doorway of the storage room with the particular quality of stillness of someone who'd expected to find something and had found it. His eyes went to the paper she was writing on, to the documents on Vera's table, to Vera's laptop. He said, I think you should put that down. And Maris Rowan, who had spent 14 months absorbing damage in silence, looked at the man in the doorway of her mother's diner, and felt something shift in her chest that was not fear and was not calm, but was something harder and colder than either. The particular quality of a person who has just run out of options and discovered, at the bottom of that emptiness, that what remains is not nothing. What remains is the decision about who she was going to be now that it had come to this. She set the pen down. She looked at him, and she said, close the door. The man in the doorway had a name she would learn later, Rourke, Victor Rourke, nominally a nomad writer affiliated loosely with a Gulf Coast chapter, actually nothing of the kind. But in this moment, he was simply the shape of a problem she had not solved yet, standing between her and the only door out of the storage room. She had told him to close the door. He had not moved. She looked at him steadily. He was mid-40s, average height, the kind of unremarkable that was itself a kind of construction. Nothing about him that drew the eye, nothing that stuck in memory. a face designed by habit or intention to pass through rooms without leaving impressions. He wore an iron veil patch that Cade hadn't given him. She understood that now with the cold certainty of someone whose body had processed the information before her mind caught up. "The documents on that table," he said. His voice was careful, professional. "I need you to step away from them." "You said that already." "I'm saying it again." Maris looked at the documents, at Vera's laptop, at the paper she'd been writing on, half covered in her own handwriting, the document chain she'd been reconstructing from memory. She looked at all of it, and she thought about what those documents represented. 31 families, a federal fraud case, everything Vera had spent the past 10 hours building. And she thought about the man in front of her who had been in the camp all day carrying a patch he hadn't earned, feeding information to Preston Hale, and who was now standing in the doorway of her mother's diner, telling her to step away. She picked up her pen. Something moved in his face. He stepped into the room. She screamed. Not a scream of fear. That was the thing about it. It didn't feel like fear. It felt like a calculation, the fastest available tool, and she used it at full volume without hesitation or apology. The particular sound of a woman in a building full of people who might hear her, and it lasted exactly 2 seconds before Rourke crossed the room and his hand closed around her forearm. She did not let go of the pen. "Stop," he said. The kitchen door burst open. Lou came through first, her evening cook, 52 years old, 230 pounds, a man who'd worked kitchens his whole life and had forearms like structural elements. And he came through the door with the immediate instinct of someone who'd heard something wrong and had not stopped to analyze it. He took in the room, the man with his hand on Maris's arm, and Lou said something short and anatomically specific and moved. Rourke released her arm and turned, and the next 4 seconds were not elegant or cinematic, but they were decisive. Lou was larger and had the physical conviction of someone defending territory, and Rourke, whatever else he was not a fighter in the way that mattered here. He went into the shelving unit. Cans came down. The overhead bulb swung. Maris went for the documents. She gathered Vera's papers with both arms. Not carefully, not sorted, just gathered, the mass of them, the laptop with the screen still open, all of it pressed against her chest. And she stepped around Lou and Rourke, and through the kitchen door, and she kept moving. Through the kitchen, past the grill, out the back door into the cold. She stopped in the parking lot with her arms full of documents and her breath coming in white bursts in the freezing air, and she stood there for a moment, the cold hitting her all at once, and she thought, where is Vera? Vera had been on her phone. She'd been pacing. She'd gone through the kitchen toward the front of the diner while Maris was writing 15 minutes ago, and Maris had not seen her since. She went around the building, the front parking lot, 3 Iron Veil bikes, Route 9 beyond, no Vera, the buzzing neon, Clyde's tired red light, her breath, her phone. She called Cade. He picked up on the first ring. "I'm 3 minutes out." There was a man in the storage room. Lou's dealing with him. "I got the documents, but I don't have Vera. Where is she?" "I don't know. She was in the diner. She went toward the front. Go to the camp, right now. Find Donovan Reese, nobody else. Tell him what happened." His voice was completely controlled in a way that told her exactly how not controlled the situation was. "Don't go back in the diner. Cade, 3 minutes. Go." She went. Donovan Reese was at the fire when she came through the field. He saw her face first, then the armload of documents, and he was on his feet before she reached him, his hand up to quiet the questions starting from the people around him. She told him fast. The man in the storage room, the photograph, the texts, Vera missing. Reese listened with the focused stillness of a man processing threat information, and when she finished, he turned to the 2 men nearest him and said 3 words she didn't fully hear, and they moved without discussion into the dark toward the parking area. "The documents," she said. "I need these somewhere. Give them to Cora." He pointed. The broad-shouldered woman from the kitchen, standing near the camp table. "Cora runs the vehicle registrations for the Virginia chapter. She's forgotten more about document security than most lawyers know." She went to Cora, who took the pile from her arms and looked at it once and said, "Okay," and carried it to one of the larger motorcycles with a hard case on the back and locked it inside with the economy of someone who'd been trusted with important things before and had not failed at it. Headlights swept the field entrance. Maris turned. Cade's Harley came in fast and stopped hard. the rear wheel cutting a short arc in the grass. He was off the bike before it had fully settled, and behind him, she hadn't seen them until now, 2 more riders came in from the road. Whitmore was one of them. He was riding, which meant whatever had almost happened at the Millway Inn had been redirected into something else. His face was the face of a man who had climbed down from a very high ledge under his own power and was not entirely sure how he felt about that. Cade came straight to her. He looked at her arm where Rourke had grabbed it. A red mark, not serious. His jaw tightened. "I'm fine," she said. "I know." He looked toward the diner. "Lou?" "Handling it." "Rourke is Hale's man," he said. "Not a question." "Has to be. He was watching us. The photograph of you and Whitmore. He was inside the camp all day." Cade's voice was flat and cold, the specific coldness of a man confronting a violation of something he held as fundamental. Someone had worn the patch without earning it. In the mathematics of this world, she was beginning to understand that was not a minor offense. "Where's Vera?" "Still don't know." He turned. "Priest." Priest materialized from somewhere in the dark. He always seemed to do this, appear without announcing the approach. "Already on it," he said. 2 people at the diner front and back. Lou says Rourke is zip-tied to the shelving unit. "Good." "Vera Chow?" "She was inside the diner 20 minutes ago. Find her." "Working on it." He moved away. Cade looked at Maris. "You screamed," he said. It was the fastest option. Something in his face, not quite the shape of a smile, but adjacent. "Yeah," he said. It was. Vera was in the men's room of Clyde's diner. This was not, she explained with perfect composure when Priest found her, as undignified as it sounded. She'd heard something in the storage room, processed the risk correctly, locked herself in the only interior room with a functioning lock, and spent the intervening time on her phone. "The Nashville TRO is dead," she told Cade when they were assembled in the parking lot, documents retrieved from Cora's case and spread on the hood of Maris's Civic under a flashlight Reese was holding. The temperature was in the low 30s. Nobody mentioned it. The motion to reassign was filed by Hale's team, and it's been granted. The judge recused. She paused. "But I made 3 calls in that bathroom." "To who?" Cade said. "The first was to a federal prosecutor I know in the Eastern District of Tennessee. I've worked with her before. The 4-case pattern plus the shell company structure plus the document chain from the billing agreement. She's interested, genuinely interested. She's pulling the Meridian file tonight." "How long before she can move?" Cade said. "She can file for an emergency injunction out of her office. Different jurisdiction from Nashville. Different judge." Vera looked at the documents on the hood. "But she needs the original billing agreement, the one Maris retrieved from the house. She needs it submitted as evidence in the federal filing vault, digitally, tonight, from me, with my attestation." "You have it," Maris said. "I have it. I need 30 minutes uninterrupted with my laptop and a signal." She looked around at the field, the camp, the dark road. "Can you give me 30 minutes?" "We can give you 30 minutes," Cade said. "The second call," Vera said. "I called a journalist. Investigative, based in Nashville, covers financial crime. I've fed her stories before. I gave her the Meridian pattern. Not for tonight, she can't publish tonight, but for the pressure of knowing it's coming." She looked at Cade steadily. Hale is a man who has operated in shadow. The threat of daylight changes his calculation. "And the third call?" Maris said. Vera looked at her. "Carlton Voss," she said. The parking lot was very quiet. "You called the man who owns Meridian," Cade said. "I called the man who owns Meridian, and I told him that a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Tennessee was filing an emergency injunction tonight based on a 31-case fraud pattern, and that a journalist at a Nashville paper was building a story, and that an Iron Veil attorney had obtained the original billing documents proving the predatory transfer scheme." Vera picked up her pencil from the hood of the car where she'd set it. "And I told him that his local operative, Preston Hale, had made an unauthorized move tonight by accelerating the enforcement timeline, that this acceleration had generated exactly the kind of investigative attention that Voss's whole operation depended on avoiding, and that the cleanest resolution available to him was to recall Hale, withdraw the enforcement filing, and pray that the federal prosecutor decided the case was more useful as a settlement than a prosecution." Cade looked at her for a long moment. "Did he say anything?" Maris said. He said he'd need time to verify what I was telling him. And? And then he hung up. She clicked the pencil. But he didn't call back to tell me I was wrong, which means he's verifying, which means he believes some of it. Cade turned away from the hood of the car. I was looking down the road toward Harlan's Creek proper, the dark town, the distant glow of streetlights, the particular silence of a place that was asleep and did not know what was being decided on its edges. Hale, he said. He's still in town. He'll be watching the legal situation, Vera said. If Voss calls him off, we'll know within the hour. If Voss decides to let Hale run, then Hale files the enforcement with the county first thing tomorrow, Cade said. And even if the federal injunction comes through, the county enforcement happens faster, and the house and the diner are taken before anyone can stop it. He turned back. His face in the flashlight was the face of a man who had done the math and found the answer he'd been trying to avoid. Vera, your 30 minutes. Start them now. She took her laptop from Cora's case and walked toward the camp kitchen, where there was a folding table and a generator-powered light, and she sat down and began working with the absolute focused efficiency of a person who understood that the quality of attention brought to the next 30 minutes would determine outcomes that would last for years. Maris watched her go. Cade was beside her. He was looking at something in the tree line. Tell me about Whitmore, she said. He was quiet for a moment. He's okay. That's not what I asked. Another pause. He came here because of his brother, David Whitmore, Oregon, 2019. Same scheme, different company, same ownership structure, different name. Predatory debt acquisition, property lien, enforcement. David Whitmore was 61 years old and he'd lived in that house for 30 years. He stopped. He died of a cardiac event 4 days after the eviction. Whitmore found him. She stood with that. He's been looking for the people responsible for 2 years, Cade said. When the call went out and the ownership structure came through Barrel's research, when the same pattern appeared, he rode from Oregon in 2 days. He exhaled. He's not a violent man. I want to be clear about that. He came here with intentions that he would have regretted, but he's not. He's someone who lost his brother and has been carrying it alone. She thought about what that looked like, the carrying of it, 2 years. Where is he now? She said. Cade nodded toward the far side of the camp. She looked. Whitmore was sitting at one of the fire pits, alone, facing the flames. He had a cup of something, coffee, probably, and his hands were wrapped around it the way Cade's had been around the mug on the first night, absorbing warmth, and there was something about the posture of him that she recognized in the specific way you recognize things that live in the same country as your own experience. She walked toward him. Cade didn't follow. She didn't look back. She sat down on the camp chair across the fire from Whitmore. He looked at her. He had the weathered, road-stripped face of a man who'd spent a lot of years outside, and his eyes were very dark and very tired and held the specific quality she'd first noticed in Cade's eyes on the rainy night he came through her door. Not sleepy tired. The other kind. You came from Oregon, she said. Yeah. For your brother. He looked at the fire. Among other things. Tell me about him, she said. He looked back at her. Surprised, she thought, by the directness of it. Most people didn't ask directly. Most people came at it sideways or not at all. David was... He stopped, started again. He was the kind of man who fixed things, not just his own things, anybody's things. You had a broken step, he'd be there on Saturday. You had a leaking pipe, he'd know someone who knew someone. He paused. He couldn't fix this one, and I couldn't fix it for him. He looked at his hands. 4 days after they put him out. I found him on his kitchen floor in the apartment he'd rented. 61 years old, 30 years in that house. She nodded. I shouldn't have come here to do what I was going to do, he said. I know that. No, she said. Cade talked me down. I hated him for about 15 minutes for it. He almost smiled, didn't quite get there. He told me the best way to give David something was to let Vera do what she does. That the legal case, if it holds, means nobody else loses a David. He paused. I'm not sure I believe it yet, but I believe Cade. That's something, she said. Yeah. He looked at the fire. Your mom? She looked at him. Cade told me. A little. He was careful about it. I'm sorry. Her name was Carol, Maris said. And the simplicity of saying it out loud to someone who just said David with that specific weight, it did something she hadn't expected. Not grief exactly, something more like recognition. Two people sitting at a fire at midnight, each carrying a name. Carol? He repeated, quietly. They sat without speaking for a while. The fire did what fires do. Then Maris said, "What Vera's doing right now matters. For David, for Carol, for all 31 of them. I know. So stay here," she said. "Stay in this camp. Don't go anywhere alone tonight." He looked at her for a moment. A man who'd driven from Oregon in 2 days, receiving instruction from a 5-foot waitress from a town he'd never been to before yesterday. Something in his face shifted. "Okay," he said. She stood. She went back toward the main camp. 19 minutes into Vera's 30, the first county sheriff's vehicle appeared at the field entrance. Maris saw it from the center of camp. The light bar, not activated, just the headlights, slow and deliberate. The vehicle stopped at the field perimeter and sat there with its engine running. Reese was beside her in seconds. "Steady," he said, to her, to the camp around them. The word moved outward like a frequency. The camp, which had been various things throughout the evening, became very still. No sudden movements, no positions taken, just a collective, disciplined absence of aggression that was somehow more powerful than aggression would have been. 2 deputies got out of the vehicle. Maris recognized one of them. She walked forward. Kate appeared at her shoulder without announcement. She didn't break stride. The deputy who was not Danny Greer was younger, mid-20s, with the expression of someone on a call they hadn't chosen and weren't sure about. Danny Greer himself had the expression of a man who'd made a decision earlier that day and was now in the later stages of that decision, where the complications were becoming apparent. "Maris," he said. "Danny, I need you to understand." He stopped, started over. "There have been complaints, residents calling about the size of the gathering, the noise. People are—" "What people?" she said. He gestured vaguely. "The neighborhood." "Which neighbor, Danny? Specifically?" He didn't answer. "You called Hale," she said. Not loud, not performative. Just the fact, laid out in the cold air between them. "This morning, after I talked to you, you made a call." His jaw worked. "I didn't. I called someone who I thought—" "Who?" "Frank Abelard," he said. His voice had gone quieter. "Frank asked me to let him know if anything unusual was happening in town. He's county clerk. He's got responsibility for—" "Frank Abelard is on Hale's payroll," Maris said. "He identified my mother and me to Meridian Credit Services and received $4,000 for it. That information is currently part of a federal fraud filing being submitted to the Eastern District of Tennessee." She watched Danny Greer's face go through something complicated and painful. "You didn't know that?" "No." His voice had become very small. "I know you didn't." She looked at him steadily. "But Danny, I need you to hear me right now. There is a man inside this camp, a man named Rourke, who has been feeding our movements to Hale all night, who is currently zip-tied to a shelf in my diner's storage room. I need him taken into custody. Not because I want trouble, because he physically grabbed me and he's been operating under a false identity and a fraudulent club affiliation." Danny Greer looked at her, then at the field behind her, then at Cade, who had said nothing during this entire conversation and had not needed to. "I can take him in," Danny said slowly, "pending charges. That's all I'm asking." A pause. "The rest of this—" He gestured at the camp. "What's happening here? People on private land with the owner's permission," she said. "That's all this is, Danny." He looked at the camp for a long moment. The rows of motorcycles. The fires. The 60-odd people who were watching this conversation with the contained, watchful patience of people who understood that this moment required exactly this kind of stillness. "All right," he said. He and the younger deputy drove to the diner to retrieve Rourke. Maris stood in the cold and watched their taillights, and she was aware that her legs were shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the accumulated adrenaline of the past several hours and the particular physical cost of staying controlled through all of it. Cade stood beside her. "Nice work," he said quietly. "I told him the truth," she said. "That's what made it nice work." Vera finished at 34 minutes. She came out of the camp kitchen with her laptop under her arm and her expression carrying the specific quality of a person who has just done the most important work of a very high-stakes evening and knows it and is not going to perform modesty about it. "The filing is in," she said. She looked at Cade. "Prosecutor received it, confirmed receipt, is moving for the emergency injunction now. We have a federal case record number." The camp around them absorbed this information with the quiet intensity of people who understood what it meant without needing it explained. "Voss called back," Vera said. She held up her phone. One missed call, a Nashville number she didn't recognize. "He didn't leave a message, which tells me he got the filing information confirmed. He knows it's real." "Will he pull Hale?" Cade said. "He's a businessman," Vera said. "A criminal businessman, but a businessman. The question is whether he thinks Hale can execute the enforcement before the federal injunction is served, which takes time even after filing, and whether that execution is worth the additional exposure." She looked at the dark road. If Hale moves in the next 2 hours, he might beat the injunction to the county office. "Then we need to make sure he can't move in the next 2 hours, Cade said. He turned to Reese. What followed was not a speech. It was not rousing or cinematic. It was a series of quiet, precise instructions delivered in the specific shorthand of people who'd worked together in difficult situations before, and it moved through the camp in the same way, rapid, purposeful, without panic. By 11:45 p.m., Main Street in Harlan's Creek was lined with motorcycles. Not aggressively, not with engines running or lights blazing. They were parked, in rows, on both sides of the street from the hardware store to the end of the block, silent and chrome and absolutely present. The riders stood on the sidewalk or sat on their bikes in the cold and said nothing to anyone who came by, which was very few people at this hour. And what they presented to the empty street was not threat, but weight. The unmistakable gravity of a large number of people who had decided, collectively and without ambiguity, that they were not going anywhere. Maris stood in front of the diner. She could see her reflection in the dark glass of the front door. Small, winter jacket, hands at her sides. The buzzing neon above her, Clyde's in red. Cade came and stood beside her. They looked at the street. "How many?" she said. "All of them," he said. "Everybody in camp." She counted what she could see. It was more than 60. Some had come in after she'd stopped keeping count, during the evening, arriving off the highway in pairs and small groups, swelling the numbers on Grain Street. She didn't know the total. It was large. "They're going to be cold," she said. "They've been cold before." She turned and went inside the diner. She started the coffee. For the next 2 hours, Maris Rowan ran coffee and food out to the street at regular intervals. Not because anyone asked, but because it was what she knew how to do, and because it was, in its own way, the same thing everyone else was doing. Showing up. Doing the thing. Around 1 a.m., Cade took a cup from her, and their fingers touched briefly on the ceramic, and neither of them mentioned it, and both of them were aware of it. Around 1:30, Vera got a call. She stepped away. She came back 5 minutes later. "Voss pulled Hale," she said. The street absorbed the information in the same quiet way it absorbed everything. A ripple. A settling. "The enforcement filing is being withdrawn," Vera said. Voss's attorney called the prosecutor's office directly. They want to negotiate a settlement framework before the injunction hearing, which means they're scared of the hearing, which means the case is real. She looked at Maris. "The house is safe. Tonight, the house is safe." Maris held her coffee cup. She did not cry. She had not cried in 14 months, and this was not going to be the moment that changed that, she decided, although it was perhaps the closest she'd come. What she felt was not relief exactly. It was something more complex than relief. The specific sensation of a weight you've carried so long, you've lost the sense of its dimensions finally shifting, and the disorientation of suddenly standing differently. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," Vera confirmed. "The legal fight isn't over. It's going to take months to fully resolve. But the immediate threat..." She paused. "Yes. Tonight, you're okay." She looked at the street. 60 people in the cold. The chrome and leather, and the quiet, patient, unmovable presence of all of them. She thought about the West Virginia couple. 3 days late. Not this time. She went back inside and made more coffee. At 2:14 a.m., Preston Hale tried to leave. She didn't see this part directly. Priest told her about it afterward, with the brevity of a man summarizing an uninteresting conclusion to an interesting story. Hale came out of the Millway Inn with his leather portfolio and his polished shoes and his rental car in the lot. And when he pulled out of the lot, he found Main Street was not passable. Not because anyone was blocking it technically, but because there were a large number of motorcycles parked on both sides, and people standing on the sidewalk, and the effective width of the street had become insufficient for a rental car operated by a man who was already extremely aware of his current exposure. He tried 3rd Street. Same. He tried the route out past the grain elevator on Route 9. There were 6 motorcycles parked legally on the shoulder, and the riders were standing outside in the cold not doing anything in particular. He went back to the Millway Inn. He sat in his room and waited. Priest said it with no evident satisfaction, just the flat delivery of a logistical update. The satisfaction, to the extent it existed, was distributed somewhere in the temperature of the night air and the coffee and 60 pairs of hands and the sound of the street. Around 3 a.m., Maris sat in the corner booth, her mother's booth, the one Carol Rowan had always liked for the angle of morning light, which was not relevant at 3 a.m., but she sat there anyway. And she held a cup of coffee, and she looked at the street through the glass, and she was so tired that the tiredness had become its own kind of stillness. Cade sat across from her. He didn't speak for a while. She didn't either. The diner was empty except for the 2 of them. Vera was in the back room, still working, because Vera did not appear to have a setting below active. Lou had gone home 2 hours ago. The kitchen was quiet. "Tell me something," she said. He looked at her. "The West Virginia couple," she said. "The ones who lost the house. You said you got there 3 days late." "Yeah." "What did you do when you got there?" He was quiet for a moment. "We helped them move," he said. "Into their daughter's place, 7 of us. Truck, boxes. 3 days of moving." He paused. "It wasn't enough. I know it wasn't enough. But it was what we could do." "Did they know why you were there?" "We told them who we were, what we'd been trying to do." He paused. "The husband, Elroy, his name was, he shook my hand for a long time. He didn't say much, but he held on." She looked at her coffee. "I keep thinking about them," she said. "All of them, the 31. I know. Vera's case, even if it holds, even if Voss settles, the people who already lost can't get that back," he said. "No, they can't. Does that—" She stopped, tried again. "How do you carry that?" "The ones you didn't get to in time." He looked at her with those gray-brown eyes that held the particular exhaustion she'd recognized from the first night and understood now in a way she hadn't then. "The same way you carried your mother for 14 months by yourself," he said. "Badly, imperfectly, and still forward." She held that. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. And she understood that he was not speaking only about grief or only about debt collection schemes or only about the next phase of a federal fraud case. I was speaking about all of it at once. In the compressed, economical way he spoke about everything that mattered. She looked at him across the table, the buzzing neon outside, the chrome-lined street, the cold pressing against the glass. She was about to say something. She didn't know what exactly. Something true, something in the same register as what he'd said. When Vera came through the kitchen door fast enough that both of them looked up. Her face had changed, not in a good way. "The federal filing," she said. "The case number we received tonight, it's been challenged. Hale's legal team filed a counter-motion in the Eastern District claiming jurisdictional conflict with the Nashville case." She held up her phone. The screen was lit. "The prosecutor called me. The hearing has been pushed to first thing tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Cade straightened. "That's manageable," he said. "It's not," Vera said. Her voice was careful and very even. "Because Hale's team also filed an emergency motion with the county tonight, filed it 3 minutes ago, while Voss's withdrawal was processing. It's a parallel track. County enforcement, separate from the federal case, using a different provision in the original lien." She looked at them. "They anticipated the federal filing. They had this ready. The county enforcement can proceed independently of the federal injunction. The county clerk—" She stopped. They both understood what she'd stopped at. "Frank Abelard," Maris said. "The county enforcement requires the county clerk to countersign the filing before it can be executed," Vera said. "Frank Abelard is the county clerk. If Hale reaches him before we do—" Maris was already standing. "Where does Abelard live?" Cade said. 14 Meridian Road, Maris said, and then heard herself say it and felt something cold move through her. Meridian Road, as if the address itself were a message she'd been too beaten down to read for months. "It's 3 minutes from here." Cade looked at her. At Vera. At the dark street outside with its 60 riders. "If Abelard signs that enforcement tonight," Vera said, "the federal hearing tomorrow doesn't matter. The county has already acted." The diner was absolutely silent. Outside, the motorcycles lined both sides of the street in the cold dark, 60 people who had come from everywhere. And in the Millway Inn 2 blocks away, Preston Hale was on his phone to a county clerk who had once shaken a grieving woman's hand at a graveside and called it sympathy. And the window between what could still be prevented and what could not was not a window anymore. It was a crack, and it was closing. Cade was already moving toward the door. "Maris," he said. Not a command, not permission. A question he was asking with her name. She picked up her keys. She was already answering. 14 Meridian Road was a ranch house at the end of a quiet street, brick and modest, with a porch light that Frank Abelard kept burning through the night, out of a habit his wife had started and he'd maintained after she passed, 3 years ago. The kind of small, persistent loyalty that costs nothing and means everything. Maris had always thought it was kind, that light. She did not know what she thought about it now. Cade's Harley was in the street, her Civic was behind it. And behind her Civic, because Reese had seen them leave and made a decision without being asked, 4 more motorcycles. Not 60. 4. The specific number of people who understood that what was about to happen at 14 Meridian Road needed to be handled with precision rather than force, and who had trusted that instinct. It was 3:24 a.m. The porch light burned orange and steady in the cold. Maris got out of her car. Her breath came white. The street was absolutely silent, except for the ticking of cooling engines, and somewhere, far off, the sound of a dog responding to the motorcycles with the half-hearted alarm of an animal who'd already decided this wasn't worth leaving warmth for. She walked up the porch steps. She knocked. For a moment, nothing. Then light under the door. Interior light, the hallway. And then the sound of movement. And then Frank Abelard opened the door in a bathrobe and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the expression of a man who'd been awake already, which told her everything she needed to know about what kind of call he'd been expecting. He saw her. He saw Cade behind her on the porch steps. He saw the motorcycles in the street. Something happened in his face. It was not a simple thing. It was the collapse of multiple simultaneous performances. The neighbor, the public servant, the sympathetic presence at the graveside. All of them falling away at once. And what was underneath was not a monster. That was the thing she hadn't prepared for. What was underneath was a man who was 60 years old and frightened, and who had made a series of decisions over the course of years that had accumulated into something he could no longer see the shape of clearly because he'd been inside it too long. "Maris," he said. His voice was rough with sleeplessness. "Don't sign it, Frank," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know what you know exactly what I mean." She kept her voice level. Not cold. She had thought driving here that she would be cold, that the consulting agreement with his name on it, the $4,000, her mother's name in the referral file, all of it would have burned away any capacity for anything except anger. But what she felt standing on his porch at 3 a.m. was something more exhausted and more honest than anger. "Hale called you tonight. He needs the county enforcement countersigned, and I'm asking you not to do it." Frank Abelard looked at her hands, at her face, at Cade, who was standing 2 steps below her and had not said a word. "If I don't—" He stopped. "Hale has documentation about how I was involved. If I don't cooperate with him, he uses it." "He uses it anyway," she said. "Frank, we have the consulting agreement. Vera Chow has it. It's in the federal filing. His documentation of your involvement doesn't protect you anymore because the federal prosecutors already have it. The only thing signing that enforcement does is make your cooperation with him official and ongoing." She paused. "Right now, you're someone who made a terrible decision and got used by a predator who was better at this than you understood. The moment you countersign that enforcement, you're his partner." The porch light buzzed between them. She watched him absorb this. Not quickly. It moved through him slowly, the way cold moves through a building, finding every gap. His hands on the doorframe tightened and then loosened. His eyes went somewhere she couldn't follow, somewhere internal, and she thought about what he was seeing there. The moment he'd first agreed to Hale's arrangement, the money, the names he'd provided, The specific name he'd provided that was her mother's name, Carol Rowan, a woman who had brought soup to his house and sat with him after his wife died. She saw the exact moment he arrived at that memory. His face did something that had no name she knew. "I can't undo what I did," he said, barely audible. "No," she said. "You can't." "Your mother, don't," she said. And it was the first moment her voice had changed. Not loud, not broken, just the single syllable of a door closing on something she was not going to let him open right now on his porch at 3 a.m. in a bathrobe. "Not tonight. That's not why I'm here." He looked at her. "I'm here because there are 31 families," she said. "And there's a federal case that can stop this from happening to anyone else. And I need you to not make a phone call tonight." She held his gaze. "That's all. That's everything I'm asking." A very long silence. Then Frank Abelard said, "I'll need to talk to someone. A lawyer." "That's the right call," she said. "Tonight?" "Tonight," she said. "Before Hale tries again." He looked past her at Cade, at the motorcycles, at the cold, empty street. "Is there going to be—" He gestured vaguely. "No," Maris said. "There's not going to be anything. These people are going back to their camp. I'm going back to my diner." She paused. "And you're going to call a lawyer and tell them everything, starting from the beginning." He looked at her for one more moment with the specific look of a man confronting the full accumulated weight of who he'd become, and finding it heavier than he'd understood while he was becoming it. He nodded. She turned and walked back down the porch steps. Cade fell in beside her at the bottom. They walked to the street without speaking. She heard the door close behind her. Not slammed, just closed, the sound of a man going back inside to sit with what he had to sit with. She stopped at her car. The street was still and cold, and the motorcycles were dark shapes in it. "He'll cooperate," she said. "Yeah," Cade said. "You knew he would." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought he might. People who aren't built for the thing they've been doing. You can usually see it in them by the time they get caught. He was never built for this." "He still did it." "He did," Cade said. "And he's going to spend a long time with that." He looked at the house. "That's not nothing." She looked at the house, too, the porch light still burning. "No," she said. "It's not nothing." She got in her car. She drove back to the diner. Potom. The call from Vera came at 6:47 a.m. Maris was behind the counter. She'd slept for 2 hours on the cot in the back room that she kept for long shifts. Dreamless sleep, the sleep of a body that had simply run out of available fuel for consciousness. And she'd been up since 5, moving through the opening routines of the diner with the muscle memory of years. Coffee. Grill warm-up. The particular ordering of a morning that was ordinary on its surface and nothing of the kind underneath. Vera's voice on the phone was the voice of someone who had also not slept, but who had used the hours differently. "The federal injunction was granted at 6:15, she said. "All Meridian enforcement actions in all 4 states are suspended pending the fraud hearing. The prosecutor's office is moving for full charges against Voss and Hale." A pause. Frank Abelard called the prosecutor's office at 4 in the morning. He gave a voluntary statement. He's cooperating. Maris was holding the coffee pot. She set it down. "The 31 cases," she said, "all covered under the injunction. Every family with an active Meridian enforcement or pending lien, they're protected while the case develops." Another pause. "Some of them already lost property before this investigation. That's a civil remedy question, and it's going to be complicated and slow. But no one else loses anything to Meridian, not now." The diner was empty still. The breakfast crowd wouldn't start for another 20 minutes. Through the front windows, Route 9 was beginning to show the gray early light of a Tennessee morning coming in sideways and cold and clear. "Vera," Maris said. "Yes." "Thank you." A brief silence, the kind that acknowledged something without being comfortable with sentiment. "Do what you did last night on that porch," Vera said. "Regularly. In every room you walk into." She paused. "You're the reason any of this held together." She ended the call. Maris stood behind the counter of her mother's diner for a moment with the phone in her hand and the empty dining room around her and the buzzing neon above the door. She listened to the silence. It was a different quality than the silence she'd been living inside for 14 months. Something had changed in it. Not the absence of sound, but the nature of it. The silence of a room that had been through something and was resting now, rather than the silence of a room waiting for the next blow. She put the phone in her apron. She picked up the coffee pot. She finished opening the diner. They began leaving around 9 in the morning. Not all at once, in the same way they'd arrived, in the staggered, unhurried manner of people who had somewhere to be and were not performing urgency. Pairs and small groups, engines starting up in the field behind Grain Street, the sound carrying across the town in the clear morning air. She could hear them from the diner. She didn't stop work to market. She refilled cups and ran plates and moved through the breakfast crowd, which was larger than usual, people who'd come to see the aftermath of something they were already starting to reshape in their own telling of it. Beryl came in for breakfast at 9:30. He sat at the counter with the ease of someone who'd decided this stool was his for the duration, and he ate eggs and toast and drank 3 cups of coffee and talked to her about the Tennessee winter with the same pleasant conversational calm he'd maintained while being used as an arrest tactic the night before. His prosthetic arm rested on the counter beside his plate. He caught her looking at it once and said, without changing his tone, "Fallujah, 2005. The arm went, but so did a lot of things that were worse to lose." He paused. "The arm I miss sometimes. The other things I don't." She didn't ask what the other things were. She refilled his coffee. Whitmore came in at 10. He sat in the corner booth, her mother's booth, the angle of morning light booth, and he was quiet and ate a full breakfast for the first time in what she suspected was a long time, with the careful attention of a man reacquainting himself with the idea that food was worth tasting. She brought him coffee, and he looked up at her and said, "I'm going to go see them." "Who?" she said, though she thought she knew. "The couple in West Virginia, Elroy and his wife." He wrapped both hands around the mug. "Cade went before. I never went. I think I need to go." "Yeah," she said. "I think you do too." He looked out the window. The morning light was hitting the diner glass at the low angle that made everything look like it was happening inside amber, warm and slightly unreal and very still. "David would have liked this place," he said. She put her hand on the edge of his table for a moment. Then she went back to work. Cora dismantled the camp kitchen with the same organizational efficiency she'd assembled it. By 11 a.m., the field behind Grain Street showed only pressed grass and the black circles of extinguished fires, and the particular ephemeral evidence of a large number of people having been somewhere recently. She came by the diner to return a borrowed extension cord, which Maris hadn't known had been borrowed, and they stood in the parking lot for a moment in the cold. "You run a good operation," Cora said. She was looking at the diner. "It's held together with electrical tape and stubbornness," Maris said. "Most of the worth-keeping things are." Cora looked at her. "You know what you did last night? On Abelard's porch?" "I talked to someone." "You gave someone a way out that wasn't humiliation," Cora said. "That's harder than it sounds and rarer than it should be." She put out her hand. Maris shook it. Cora got on her bike and rode away, and Maris stood in the parking lot watching until the sound of her was gone, and then she went back inside because the lunch prep didn't do itself. Reese left with the Virginia contingent at noon, shaking hands around the camp with the formal brevity of someone who didn't do goodbye ceremonies because they found them inaccurate. You were either going to see someone again or you weren't, and the length of the goodbye didn't change that. He stopped at the diner on his way out. He sat at the counter. He did not order anything. "Cade's going to stay a few more days," he said. "He doesn't have to." Reese looked at her with the particular look of a man who finds some things not worth arguing. "I know he doesn't have to." He put a card on the counter. Plain, a phone number, no name. "Iron Vale Southeast. If something comes up, anything, you don't have to be alone in it." She looked at the card. A phone number. The skull in the corner. The second one of those she'd been given. The first was in her junk drawer between the dead batteries and the takeout menus, where she'd put it 7 days ago when she'd told herself she wasn't going to keep it. She picked up this one and held it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and walked out. By 2 in the afternoon, Main Street had returned to the version of itself that Harlan's Creek recognized. The motorcycles were gone from the curbs. The parking lots were ordinary. If you'd arrived in town at 3 p.m. on this Monday, you would have found a quiet Tennessee Main Street in winter, with a diner that smelled like coffee, and a neon sign that buzzed, and a woman behind the counter who moved through her work with the particular economy of someone who'd been doing this long enough to do it in her sleep. You would not have known anything had happened here, except that Ray Desmond, sitting in his corner booth with his decaf, had moved the television remote to a different position on the table to make room for the person sitting across from him, a thing that had never happened in Maris's memory. And the person across from him was one of the older Iron Veil members she recognized from the camp, a man who'd arrived from Alabama, white-haired and slow-moving, and apparently possessed of something to say to Ray Desmond that Ray Desmond was actually listening to. She watched them through the pass-through. She did not ask. Oh. Preston Hale was taken into federal custody at 4:17 p.m. at the Nashville airport. Vera texted her this fact without preamble, followed by a second text that read, Carlton Voss surrendered voluntarily to federal prosecutors in Delaware at 3 p.m. His lawyers negotiated the surrender in exchange for a cooperation agreement. He'll testify against Hale. Then a third text. The predator ate the operative, which is how it always ends. Then, get some sleep, Maris. She laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed in, she couldn't remember. It came out differently than she expected, rougher and more real, a sound that surprised her own throat. Lou looked at her from the grill. Good news? He said. Yeah, she said. Good news. He nodded like this was the correct outcome of all things and went back to his grill. Cade found her at 4:30, sitting on the back step of the diner in the cold with a cup of coffee she'd made for herself, which she almost never did. She was always making coffee for other people and drinking whatever was left at the end, which was usually the burnt bottom of the last pot. This was a fresh cup made specifically for herself, and she was sitting with it in the winter afternoon light and not doing anything in particular except being outside and being still. He came through the back door and looked at the step, and she moved over and he sat beside her. They were quiet for a while. The back lot was empty. The dumpster, the recycling bin, the patchy asphalt. The tree line beyond, the Tennessee winter holding everything in its stripped, gray clarity. Vera told me, he said, about Hale. And Voss. He drank his coffee. And Abelard. Abelard's cooperating. I know. Do you think it matters, she said, for the 31 families, the ones who already lost? It matters because without his cooperation, the civil cases are harder, he said. He knows the process. He was inside it. His testimony is what connects Hale's operations to the deliberate targeting scheme. He paused. It doesn't give back what they lost. No. The couple in West Virginia, he said. Elroy and Margaret Hurst. I called them this morning. She looked at him. I wanted them to know what happened here, he said. What the case means. That someone is going to answer for it. He stopped. Elroy cried. On the phone. He's 73 years old and I listened to him cry and I didn't say much because there wasn't much to say. He looked at his coffee cup. Sometimes that's the thing. You just stay on the line. The back lot was quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a single engine, not a motorcycle, just a car on Route 9, passed and faded. Whitmore's going to see them, she said. I know. I think it'll be good. For all of them. A pause. Whitmore's a good man who got lost in something for 2 years. He needed somewhere to put it that wasn't what he was going to do at the Millway Inn. He exhaled. Harlan's Creek gave him that somewhere. You gave him that somewhere. We did, he said, with the specific quiet of a man who does not accept credit comfortably, but also does not deflect it dishonestly. She drank her coffee. The afternoon was going gold at the edges. The particular low winter light that came late and left fast, everything briefly warm-colored before the dark moved in. The back of the diner was not a beautiful view by any objective standard, but the light was doing what it did to everything, and it had a quality she didn't want to look away from. What happens to you now, she said, after you leave? He was quiet for a moment. I ride. There's a situation in eastern Kentucky the chapter needs. Nothing like this. More straightforward. Then I go back to the Virginia chapter house for a while. Sleep in an actual bed. The faintest edge of something in his voice. Not quite wry. The shape of it. Do you have somewhere? She said. An actual somewhere. Not a chapter house. A longer pause. I have a place in Roanoke. I'm there maybe 4 months out of the year. He paused. It's sufficient. Sufficient. She filed the word. You said you were there 11 years, she said. The army. Yeah. And then 2 years being angry. Something like that. And then Iron Veil. Yes. She looked at her coffee. Do you ever want something? She stopped, tried to find the right words for a question she wasn't sure she was entitled to ask. Something that's just yours? That isn't the road or the chapter or the next situation. He was very quiet for a long time. Yeah, he said, just the one word. But the weight of it was everything that the one word could hold. She nodded. They sat on the back step in the winter light and drank their coffee, and neither of them said anything else because the thing that needed saying had been said, however compressed, however carefully, and it was enough for now, and both of them were people who understood the importance of enough for now. He left on Wednesday morning. She was opening the diner, the early routine, the keys in the lock, the lights coming on one section at a time, the smell of the building waking up. When she heard the Harley in the parking lot and came to the window. He was on the bike, jacket, helmet in his hand, the weathered iron veil patch across his shoulders catching the early light. She went to the door. He looked at her from across the parking lot. She looked back. Coffee before you go? She called. He looked at her for a moment. Then he put the kickstand down and got off the bike. He sat at the counter, the same stool as the first night, she noticed, without making a point of it. And she poured him a cup, and he wrapped both hands around it, and she stood on the other side of the counter, and the diner was empty, and the morning was just beginning to happen outside the windows. I'll be back through in about 6 weeks, he said. Okay, she said. I'll stop in. Okay? He drank his coffee. She made herself a cup and stood across from him with it, and neither of them performed anything, and the silence was the good kind, the kind that had weight because of what had filled it before, not emptiness. The legal case, he said. It's going to run long. Vera will keep you informed, but there may be depositions, testimony requests, things she'll need from you. I know. I'll be here. He nodded. The house, he said. The house is fine. She said it and felt the truth of it land in her chest, the specific reality of it. The house on Crestline Street was fine. The diner was open. The debt had been formally suspended pending the federal case, and Vera had already begun the process of challenging the original liability transfer, which she described with the confident certainty of someone who'd done this before and was not worried. It's going to be okay. Yeah, he said. It is. He finished the coffee. He put money on the counter. Too much again, by a specific enough margin that she thought it was deliberate. She didn't give it back. He stood. He picked up his helmet. She walked around the counter. He looked at her and she held out her hand and he took it. And what happened in that handshake was not nothing. It was a long moment of two people who had been through something together, recognizing each other across the distance of everything they hadn't said yet, and everything there was still time to say. Then she let go. He went through the door. The bell chimed. She stood at the window and watched him cross the parking lot and get on the bike and put on the helmet and kick the engine to life. That particular sound, deep and rolling, the sound that had come down Route 9 through the rain 7 days ago and changed everything. And then he pulled out of the lot and onto Route 9, and she watched the taillights until the road bent and he was gone. The diner was quiet. She went back behind the counter. She picked up his coffee cup and held it for a moment in her mother's hands. Then she set it in the bus bin and went to start the grill. The months that followed moved differently than the 14 before them. Not easier, exactly. The federal case was what Vera had said it would be. Long, demanding, requiring her attention and her testimony and her patience in ways that cost something each time. She gave depositions twice, in Nashville and once by video for the Delaware proceedings. She sat across tables from lawyers in suits and answered questions about hospital hallways and billing coordinators, and the specific moment she'd signed a form she hadn't fully understood, and she answered all of it without flinching and without apology because those things had happened and they had happened to her, and she was done performing smallness about them. Carlton Voss took a plea agreement in April. Federal fraud, 4 counts. The sentence was the kind of sentence that took years from a man's life, in ways his lawyers spent considerable effort making seem more manageable than they were. Preston Hale went to trial. Vera testified. Maris testified. The billing coordinator who'd handed Carol Rowan the form in the hospital hallway, her name was Deborah Moss, and she was 44 years old and had 3 children and had been taking supplemental income from Meridian for 6 years, testified for the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges. She looked at Maris from the stand with the expression of a woman who had decided, finally, to stop carrying something she should have put down years ago. Maris looked back at her without cruelty. Hale was convicted in May. Frank Abelard pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges in June, before sentencing scheduled for fall. Maris was asked to submit an impact statement. She wrote it herself, at the kitchen table in her mother's house, at 2 a.m, in her own handwriting, in the same careful and unadorned way she'd written everything during that week in November when she'd discovered that the truth, stated plainly, was the most durable thing she owned. She did not ask anyone to review it. She sent it as written. The diner got a new neon sign in July. Not because she'd planned it, the old one failed finally, irreparably, on a Tuesday morning in late June, the Clyde's letters going dark one by one over the course of a week until the sign was just a buzzing aluminum shell above the door that provided sound without light. She'd looked at it for 3 days before calling someone. The new sign was the same design, her choice, same red letters. But the apostrophe was fixed. Clyde's, complete and correct, throwing clean red light onto Route 9 without buzzing. She stood in the parking lot the first night it was on and looked at it for a while. Lou came and stood beside her with his arms crossed. "Same color," he said. "Same color," she agreed. "Your mom picked that red," he said. "I know she did." He nodded, like that settled something, and went back inside. She stayed a moment longer. The sign was the same and not the same. Something fixed. Something that had always been broken getting corrected, not in the way of replacement, but in the way of completion. She went back inside to close up. Cade came back in late October. She knew he was coming. He'd called the week before, brief and direct, which was the only way he called. He said he'd be through on a Saturday. She said okay. That was the whole conversation. He arrived at 11 in the morning and parked the Harley in the same spot as always, which was the spot nearest the door that wasn't designated for anything. And he came through the door and the bell chimed and she was at the counter and she looked up. He looked different in October than he had in November. Not younger. He was not a man who was going to look younger, but something in his bearing had settled slightly. Some quality of perpetual bracing that she'd noticed without naming in the winter had moderated a fraction. The road had done something to him in these months, or undone something, and she filed that observation without comment. He sat at the counter. She poured his coffee. He wrapped his hands around it. "How's the case?" he said. "Hale's sentencing is in December. Vera thinks 7 to 10. She refilled a cup down the counter and came back. "The civil cases for the other families are moving. Slowly. It's going to be a long process." "Yeah." "Worth it, though," she said. "Yeah," he said again, with the weight that word had when he meant it completely. They were quiet for a while. The Saturday morning crowd moved around them. Maris working, the diner doing what it did, the ordinary machine of the place turning over in its familiar way. "Whitmore saw the hearse," he said. "I heard. He called me from West Virginia." She'd been surprised by that. The call, the fact that he had her number, the fact that he'd wanted to tell her. "He stayed 4 days. He's doing better," Cade said. "He seemed it." She leaned on the counter for a moment, the particular lean of someone whose feet had been working for 3 hours. He said Elroy showed him the garden. In the daughter's backyard, they're growing things. Something in Cade's face that was not quite a smile and was something better. "Good," he said. The morning went on. He stayed through the lunch service without making it a statement, just occupying the stool and occasionally the corner booth and ordering soup at noon. That was, on this particular Saturday, very good, because Lou was in a good mood. She brought it to him and he ate it with the same functional attention she'd noticed the first night. And then she came back and took the bowl, and he caught her wrist lightly before she turned away. Just the touch, brief, his fingers on the inside of her wrist where the pulse was, and she went still. He let go. She stood at the edge of his booth. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Roanoke." She looked at him. "It's sufficient," he said. "I told you it was sufficient." He looked at his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about whether sufficient is what I want." She held her plates and her coffee pot and the ordinary weight of a Saturday lunch shift. "What do you want?" she said. He looked up at her. Those gray-brown eyes, tired in the specific way she'd learned the language of, tired in the way of someone who'd been carrying something a long time and had not yet found the right place to set it down. "I'm still working that out," he said. "But I think—" He stopped, started again. "I think I want to spend some time figuring it out somewhere that isn't the road." She looked at him for a long moment. "Harlan's Creek isn't much," she said. "I know what it is," he said. She nodded once. She picked up his empty soup bowl. She went back behind the counter. And if there was something different in the way she moved through the afternoon after that, some quality of settled, of landed, of a world that had been very cold for a long time beginning to consider the possibility of something else. It was not the kind of thing you could point to directly. It was in the set of her shoulders, in the way she refilled cups, in the particular quality of her stillness when the afternoon slowed and the diner went quiet, and she stood behind the counter in the low October light coming through the windows and listened to the sound of an ordinary Saturday in the place she'd fought to keep. The neon sign threw red light onto the parking lot. Clyde's complete. Correct. The apostrophe fixed. The Harley sat in its spot outside. Inside, at the counter, Cade Mercer wrapped both hands around a coffee cup and looked out the window at Route 9 with the expression of a man who had been on the road for a very long time and was, for the first time in longer than he could easily account for, not thinking about the next mile. The diner smelled like coffee and the last of the lunch service, and the particular old wood warmth of a building that had been feeding people for decades and intended to continue. Outside, Tennessee went on being itself. The mountains in the distance, the highway, the wide and indifferent sky going blue-gray toward evening. A world that had not changed in the ways that worlds don't change, and had changed completely in the ways that mattered. Two people in a diner at the end of a long season, not looking for anything, already having found it. The bell above the door chimed as someone new came in, and Maris Rowan looked up from behind the counter of her mother's diner, and she said, the way she said it every time, the way she would say it tomorrow and the day after, "What can I get you?" And the ordinary work of a life continued, and that was